Hey guys, tonight we begin with a beauty trend so deadly that it literally killed royalty, so toxic that it poisoned generations, and so obsessive that people chose slow death over looking healthy. Picture this, it's 1485 and you're getting ready for a royal banquet. You carefully apply a thick layer of white paste to your face, paste made from the same substance used to make paint and seal roofs. Your skin burns slightly, but that's normal. After all, beauty requires sacrifice. What you don't know is that you're slowly poisoning your brain, destroying your organs, and shortening your life by decades. And the worst part, everyone thinks you look absolutely stunning. Welcome to medieval Europe, where pale skin wasn't just fashionable, it was a matter of life and death, where looking healthy could literally get you mistaken for a peasant, and where the phrase drop-dead gorgeous took on a whole new meaning. But here's what's really terrifying. We're still making the same deadly mistakes today, just with better marketing. So grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let me take you on a journey through the most toxic beauty trend in human history. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at your makeup collection the same way again. Now, before we dive into the gruesome details of how medieval people literally painted themselves to death, let me ask you something. What if I told you that the beauty standard that killed Queen Elizabeth is still influencing beauty trends today? That the same obsession with pale skin that created $1 billion industry in medieval Europe is now driving a multi-trillion-dollar whitening industry across Asia? If you're as fascinated by these dark beauty secrets as I am, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to see more deep dives into history's most shocking beauty practices, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're about to uncover some truly mind-blowing stories. Let's start with the fundamental truth that medieval people understood better than anyone. Your skin colour was your social security number, your credit score, and your LinkedIn profile all rolled into one. In medieval Europe, having a tan wasn't a sign that you'd been on vacation to the Riviera. It was a giant neon sign screaming, "I work with my hands for money, and I'm probably one bad harvest away from starvation." You see, medieval society was obsessed with visible class distinctions. If you were nobility, you needed to look like nobility. And nothing said, "I've never done a day of manual labour in my life," quite like skin so pale it was practically translucent. The ideal wasn't just pale, we're talking porcelain white, so light that your veins showed through like a roadmap of privilege. Think Edward Cullen. But if Edward Cullen was a 14th century duchess with a lead poisoning problem. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely insane. The geographic differences in this obsession were fascinating. In Northern Europe, where the sun barely made an appearance half the year, achieving vampire-level paleness was challenging but doable. But in Southern Europe, in Italy and Spain, where the Mediterranean sun could give you a tan just by thinking about it, that's where things got creative. And by creative, I mean horrifically dangerous. Northern nobles would literally schedule their lives around sun avoidance. They had entire protocols for moving from building to building without exposing their skin to sunlight. Some wealthy women wouldn't leave their chambers during daylight hours except in covered carriages with blackout curtains. But the real kicker, they had seasonal rituals for this. Spring wasn't about renewal and fresh air, it was about damage control. After a winter of maintaining their pale perfection, they'd assess any damage from accidental sun exposure and plan their whitening treatments accordingly. Now, let's talk about the solution medieval people came up with. Because when your beauty standard requires you to look like you've never seen sunlight, nature clearly isn't going to cooperate. Enter white lead powder, the medieval equivalent of a chemical weapon disguised as makeup. The manufacturing process was like something out of a chemistry nightmare. Artisans would take strips of lead, coil them up, and suspend them over vinegar in sealed pots. The lead would corrode from the vinegar fumes, creating a white crust that could be scraped off and ground into a fine powder. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. This wasn't some back-alley operation. This was a legitimate, regulated industry. There were guilds for lead powder manufacturers. There were quality standards. There were brand preferences. Venetian white lead was considered the Chanel of toxic makeup. French lead powder was the budget option. English lead powder. Well, let's just say you get what you pay for. The cost analysis is staggering when you convert it to modern money. A single pot of high-quality Venetian white lead would cost the equivalent of about $2,000 in today's currency. For comparison, that's like buying a small car just for your foundation. But people paid it. Gladly. Because the alternative, looking like someone who worked for a living, was social suicide. The really disturbing part. There were popular brands. Giovanni's White Death, yes, that was an actual brand name, was apparently the Mercedes of lead makeup. There were counterfeit versions. There were reviews. Medieval influencers, if you will, recommending their favourite lead-based products. Let me paint you a picture of a typical morning routine for a medieval noblewoman. And by paint, I mean literally describe how she painted her face with toxic chemicals every single day. The process started before dawn. First, any remaining makeup from the previous day had to be removed, and I use the term removed loosely, because medieval people didn't really understand the concept of thorough cleansing. They'd scrape off the worst of it with a cloth, maybe splash some rose water around, and call it good. Then came the base layer. The white lead powder was mixed with various binding agents, egg whites, crushed pearls, sometimes even ground up bones, to create a paste. This paste was then applied with brushes made from animal hair, often starting from the hairline and working down. But here's where it gets really wild. They didn't just apply one layer. Oh no. We're talking about 3, sometimes 4 layers of this toxic paste, each one allowed to dry before the next was applied. The goal was complete coverage, no natural skin colour showing through whatsoever. The application process could take hours. Literally hours. Some noblewomen had servants whose only job was makeup application. These servants had to be trained in the art of lead application. Too thin and you'd look patchy. Too thick and it would crack and flake off. And touch-ups. Forget about it. Once that lead dried, it was basically a mask. If it cracked, which it did, constantly, you had to scrape it off and start over, which meant carrying around little scrapers and emergency powder supplies. The really disturbing part was that they rarely removed it completely. Many women would just add layers day after day, only doing a full removal once a week. Imagine having cake-like layers of toxic chemicals building up on your face for days at a time. Now we get to the part where this story goes from weird historical beauty trend to medieval horror movie. The timeline of lead poisoning reads like a medical thriller. It starts innocently enough. Maybe a little fatigue, some headaches. Easy to dismiss as the rigours of noble life, but lead is patient, lead is persistent, and lead is absolutely merciless. The symptoms progression was so predictable that medieval physicians actually had a name for it, painter's disease. Because painters use the same lead-based materials. Month 1, mild fatigue, occasional headaches, nothing alarming. Month 6, stomach problems, irritability, difficulty concentrating, still attributable to other causes. Year 1, hair loss, skin problems beyond the obvious chemical burns, memory issues, starting to get concerning. Year 3, organ damage, severe cognitive decline, tremors. The beauty was literally eating them alive from the inside. The most famous victim, Queen Elizabeth IV of England. By the end of her life, she was wearing nearly an inch of white lead makeup. Contemporary accounts describe her as nearly bald, with blackened teeth and skin so damaged that she couldn't appear in public without her toxic mask. Her autopsy, though not officially recorded, was rumoured to show the classic signs of chronic lead poisoning brain damage, kidney failure, and organs that looked like they belonged to someone decades older. But here's the really twisted part, even as the symptoms became obvious. Even as people started making the connection between the makeup and the sickness, they kept using it, because the social consequences of not using it were immediate, while the health consequences were gradual. Of course, some people recognised that maybe, just maybe, covering your face in industrial-grade poison wasn't the best long-term strategy, so they got creative. The egg white and crushed pearl method was considered the natural alternative. Vendors would literally crush up real pearls that cost more than most people's houses, mix them with egg whites, and sell the mixture as a healthier face whitener. Plot twist crushed pearls are basically calcium carbonate. You know what else is calcium carbonate chalk? They were paying fortunes to cover their faces in expensive chalk. The vinegar bleaching technique was even more creative. Women would soak cloths in strong vinegar and apply them to their faces for hours at a time, believing this would bleach their skin from the outside in. The result, chemical burns that left permanent scarring. But hey, at least the scars were pale. Then there were the regional variations. French women pioneered the use of mercury-based whiteners, because apparently lead wasn't poisonous enough. Italian women developed a technique using antimony, which caused hair loss so severe that the wig industry in Venice became a major economic force. The English, not to be outdone, created a mixture that included arsenic. Yes, arsenic. The same stuff used to kill rats was being applied to faces in the name of beauty. Now here's where this medieval horror story becomes a modern cautionary tale. We like to think we've evolved. We like to believe that we've learned from these historical mistakes. But have we really? The skin whitening industry in Asia is currently worth over $13 billion annually. The products still contain dangerous chemicals, mercury, hydroquinone, steroids. The health effects are still devastating. The social pressure is still overwhelming. The only difference, we've gotten better at hiding the poison. Modern cosmetics still contain heavy metals. Your favourite lipstick probably has lead in it. Not as much as medieval makeup, but it's there. Your foundation might contain chromium. Your mascara could have mercury. We've just gotten better at the dosage. Instead of one massive dose that kills you in a few years, we're taking smaller doses that accumulate over decades. The psychological mechanism is identical. Social pressure creates an ideal that's physically impossible to achieve naturally, so people turn to artificial and dangerous methods to reach it. The marketing has improved, though instead of Giovanni's White Death, we get Platinum White Perfection Serum, or Porcelain Glow Enhancement Complex Qui, same poison, prettier packaging. So here's what we've learned from this medieval beauty disaster. When society creates impossible beauty standards, people will literally poison themselves trying to meet them. They did it 500 years ago with lead, and we're doing it today with a cocktail of chemicals that we'll probably look back on with the same horror. The real tragedy isn't that medieval people didn't know better. They did. Physicians warned about the dangers. The symptoms were obvious. But the social consequences of not conforming were immediate and severe, while the health consequences were gradual and deniable. Sound familiar? I think the most disturbing part isn't the lead itself. It's how easily an entire society convinced itself that slow suicide was an acceptable price for beauty. How quickly they normalized the abnormal, rationalized the irrational, and turned self-destruction into self-care. We've spent the last 15 minutes talking about medieval people as if they were aliens, but we're doing the exact same thing. We're just using different chemicals and calling it self-improvement. If this story shocked you as much as it shocked me when I first learned about it, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Because honestly, I think we all need to be reminded that beauty trends aren't always as harmless as they seem. Now, if you think white lead makeup was extreme, wait until you hear about what medieval people did to their foreheads, because apparently, having eyebrows and a normal hairline was considered just as offensive as having healthy-looking skin. And the solutions they came up with. They make lead poisoning look like a gentle face mask. We're talking about a beauty trend so extreme that it literally reshaped people's skulls, so painful that grown women would faint during the process, and so expensive that entire families would go into debt just to give their daughters the perfect forehead. I'm talking about the Great Forehead Expansion Project, where medieval people turned hair removal into an extreme sport, and where the phrase, beauty is pain, was taken to levels that would make modern plastic surgeons nervous. Stick around, because what you're about to discover will make everything we just talked about seem absolutely tame by comparison. Welcome back to our journey through medieval beauty hell. If you thought poisoning yourself with lead was extreme, buckle up, because we're about to explore a beauty trend that makes toxic makeup look like child's play. Picture this scenario. You're a 15-year-old noble girl in 1420s France, and your mother has just informed you that your forehead is embarrassingly low. Tomorrow, servants will begin the process of permanently removing your hairline, inch by painful inch, until your forehead extends nearly to the crown of your head. This isn't a trim. This isn't even aggressive plucking. This is architectural renovation of your actual skull shape, and it's going to take years to complete. Welcome to the Great Forehead Expansion Project, the medieval beauty trend that convinced an entire civilization that God had made a design error when creating human proportions, and they were going to fix it one follicle at a time. Now, you might be wondering how an entire society decided that foreheads needed to be the size of billboards. Well, let me take you back to a time when your intelligence was literally measured by the square footage of your forehead real estate. In medieval Europe, a high forehead wasn't just attractive, it was considered a direct window into your intellectual and spiritual capacity. The bigger your forehead, the bigger your brain, and the closer you were to God. It was phrenology before phrenology was even invented. This wasn't some random beauty fad. This was rooted in medieval philosophy and religious art. Take a look at any painting of the Virgin Mary from this period, and you'll notice something striking. Her forehead goes on for days. She looks like she could rent billboard space up there. The reasoning was actually quite sophisticated, in a completely insane way. Medieval scholars believed that the forehead housed the soul, and a larger forehead meant a more developed soul. Think of it as spiritual real estate. The more frontage you had, the more divine wisdom could move in. But here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean terrifying. The process wasn't just about removing hair. Medieval beauty experts understood that to achieve the truly dramatic forehead expansion that fashion demanded, you needed to reshape the entire front portion of the skull, and they had developed techniques to do exactly that. The transformation began in early childhood. Parents would bind their children's heads with special cloth wraps designed to gradually push the hairline backward and elongate the forehead. It's medieval cranial modification. Essentially, we're talking about deliberately reshaping a growing child's skull for aesthetic purposes. For adult women who missed this childhood opportunity, the process was far more brutal. They would use a combination of chemical depilation, hot wax treatments, and something called progressive plucking, which is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. The chemical depilatories were where medieval ingenuity really shined, and by shined, I mean created chemical warfare for your hairline. The most popular recipe involved cat feces. Yes, actual cat poop, mixed with vinegar and ground glass. The mixture would be applied to the hairline and left on for hours, literally burning the hair follicles to prevent regrowth. But wait, it gets worse. Some regions developed a technique using quicklime, the same stuff used in construction to dissolve mortar. They would create a paste of quicklime and water, apply it to the forehead, and leave it until the skin started bubbling. The goal was to create chemical burns so severe that hair could never grow back. The really disturbing part, they had to do this treatment repeatedly, because hair kept trying to grow back. Imagine having chemical burns on your forehead every few weeks for years, all in the name of achieving the perfect skull proportions. Now, let's talk about the tools of the trade, because medieval forehead expansion required specialized equipment. The tweezers alone were works of art. Master craftsmen would create custom plucking tools for wealthy clients. Tweezers made from precious metals, some decorated with jewels, others designed with special grips for maximum hair-pulling efficiency. But individual plucking was too slow for the dramatic transformation fashion demanded. So they invented something called the forehead plane, essentially a medieval hair removal device that worked like a cheese grater for your hairline. The process was methodical and agonizing. Women would sit for hours while servants systematically removed every single hair from increasingly larger areas of their foreheads. The pain was so intense that many would faint during sessions, which was actually considered a positive sign. It meant you were committed to beauty. And if you thought the pain was bad, let's talk about the timeline. Achieving the perfect forehead expansion could take anywhere from 2 to 5 years of consistent treatment. During this time, women would wear special headdresses designed to hide the work in progress and create the illusion of the final result. The headdresses themselves became an entire industry. The hennin, those cone-shaped hats that looked like medieval traffic cones, weren't just fashion statements. They were engineering marvels designed to create the optical illusion of massive foreheads, while hiding the ongoing construction project underneath. Some hennins were over 3 feet tall and required special doorways to be built in noble houses. Women had to learn to walk differently, sit carefully, and navigate staircases like they were balancing construction equipment on their heads. But here's the really wild part. The forehead expansion wasn't uniform across Europe. Different regions had different standards for what constituted the perfect forehead proportions. In France, the ideal was what they called the Gothic arch, a forehead that curved backward in a perfect semicircle, creating a dome-like effect. French women would actually use heated metal tools to curve their hairlines into specific geometric shapes. Italian women preferred what was known as the Renaissance rectangle, a perfectly flat, wide forehead that extended straight back from the eyebrows. They developed techniques using boards and weights to compress and flatten the natural forehead curve. English women went for the Tudor slope, a gradually receding hairline that created the illusion of an elongated skull. This was achieved through strategic plucking patterns that removed hair in carefully calculated gradients. The really fascinating part is how they maintained these dramatic looks once achieved, because unlike modern hair removal, medieval forehead expansion required constant maintenance. Women would have servants whose full-time job was forehead maintenance. These specialists would inspect the hairline daily, removing any new growth immediately and applying preventative treatments to keep follicles dormant. Some wealthy women had multiple forehead attendants working in shifts because the maintenance routine required round-the-clock attention. Think of it as having a full-time landscaping crew for your face. The costs were astronomical. When you factor in the initial treatments, the specialised tools, the custom headdresses, and the ongoing maintenance staff, achieving and maintaining the perfect medieval forehead could cost the equivalent of buying a house in today's money. But the social pressure was relentless. A woman with a naturally low forehead was considered unmarriageable among the nobility. Parents would go into debt to ensure their daughters could achieve the fashionable forehead proportions necessary for a good marriage. And here's where this gets really dark. The health consequences were devastating and permanent. The repeated chemical burns didn't just remove hair, they destroyed large areas of scalp tissue. Many women developed chronic infections, permanent scarring, and what we would now recognise as severe contact dermatitis that lasted for years. The skull reshaping in childhood often led to developmental problems. Children who underwent cranial modification for forehead expansion frequently suffered from headaches, vision problems, and cognitive issues that persisted into adulthood. But perhaps most tragically, the social pressure meant that women couldn't stop the treatments even when they became dangerous. The alternative, social ostracism, was considered worse than the risk of permanent disfigurement. Now, you might think this sounds like ancient history, but the psychological mechanisms behind the forehead expansion trend are alive and well today. Think about modern beauty standards that require reshaping natural body proportions. We use surgery instead of chemicals, but we're still telling people that their natural shape is wrong and needs to be fixed. The forehead expansion trend also pioneered something we see constantly now: the normalization of extreme pain for beauty. Medieval women learned to endure hours of agony because it was worth it for the results. Sound familiar? And the social pressure aspect. The idea that you can't participate in society unless you meet arbitrary physical standards, that's basically social media in medieval dress. The most disturbing parallel is how the beauty industry created a problem that didn't exist, convincing people that their natural foreheads were defective, and then sold them increasingly extreme solutions. We do the same thing now. We create insecurity about body parts people never worried about before, then market products and procedures to fix these manufactured problems. The Great Forehead Expansion Project teaches us something crucial about beauty standards when society decides that natural human proportions are wrong. People will go to absolutely insane lengths to conform, even when it destroys their health and quality of life. These medieval women weren't vain or foolish. They were responding rationally to an irrational social system that punished non-conformity more severely than it punished self-destruction. And that system hasn't gone anywhere. It's just gotten more sophisticated in how it sells us the same message that our natural selves are inadequate, and that extreme measures to change ourselves are not only acceptable but necessary. If this deep dive into medieval skull modification has opened your eyes to how beauty standards can literally reshape people's lives and bodies, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. because understanding how these patterns work is the first step in breaking free from them. Now, if you think reshaping your entire skull for beauty was extreme, wait until you discover what medieval people did to their eyebrows, or rather, what they did to completely eliminate them from existence. Because apparently, after expanding your forehead to billboard proportions, the next logical step was to ensure that absolutely nothing interrupted that vast expanse of pale skin. We're talking about a beauty trend that made eyebrows public enemy number one, where having any facial hair above your eyes was considered as offensive as showing up to church in your underwear. The techniques they developed for eyebrow annihilation make forehead expansion look like a gentle massage. They used everything from heated metal tools to acid compounds, and the results were so dramatic that people became completely unrecognizable. But the most shocking part, this wasn't just about beauty. It was about creating an entirely new category of human appearance, something that had never existed in nature. Medieval people were essentially trying to evolve themselves into a different species, one facial feature at a time. Stay tuned, because what we're about to explore will make you grateful for every single eyebrow hair you've ever had. And we're back to continue our descent into medieval beauty madness. If you thought expanding your forehead to the size of a billboard was extreme, prepare yourself for what might be the most psychologically disturbing beauty trend in human history. Imagine looking in the mirror tomorrow morning and deciding that your eyebrows, those perfectly functional, naturally occurring facial features that protect your eyes from sweat and debris, are so offensive to look at that they need to be completely erased from existence. Now imagine that this isn't just your personal preference, but a society-wide mandate, that keeping your eyebrows makes you unemployable, unmarriageable, and essentially a social pariah. That women are literally holding each other down and burning off their eyebrows with heated metal tools because anything less would be considered barbaric. Welcome to the eyebrow apocalypse, the medieval beauty trend that convinced an entire civilization that evolution had made a critical error when it gave humans facial hair, and they were going to correct this divine mistake one follicle at a time. This is the story of how medieval Europe declared war on one of the most basic features of human anatomy, and won so completely that for nearly 3 centuries, having eyebrows was essentially illegal among the upper classes. Let me paint you a picture of what medieval society considered the pinnacle of facial beauty, a completely smooth, uninterrupted expanse of pale skin from the eyelashes to the hairline. No bumps, no ridges, no shadows, and definitely no hair of any kind. They called this look the divine plane, as if God had intended human faces to be perfectly flat surfaces, like marble sculptures come to life. The idea was that any interruption in this smooth expanse was a sign of crude, animalistic nature that needed to be eliminated. The eyebrow was seen as particularly offensive because it created what they called the savage shadow, the natural shadowing effect that eyebrows create over the eyes. Medieval beauty theorists believed this shadow made people look aggressive, untrustworthy, and spiritually dark. But here's where this gets really twisted. They didn't just want to remove the eyebrows, they wanted to erase any evidence that eyebrows had ever existed in the first place. This meant not just plucking the visible hairs, but destroying the hair follicles so completely that new growth was impossible. They were essentially performing permanent eyebrow genocide on their own faces. The techniques they developed for this facial hair holocaust make our previous stories look like gentle beauty treatments. Let's start with the gentle approach, and I use that term very loosely. The basic eyebrow removal process began with hot wax applications, but not the kind of wax we use today. Medieval beauty specialists created their own wax compounds using beeswax mixed with tree resins, and sometimes powdered glass for extra grip. The wax would be heated until it was nearly molten, then applied directly to the eyebrow area. But instead of quick removal like modern waxing, they would leave the wax on for hours, allowing it to cool and harden completely, bonding with both the hair and the skin. When they finally removed it, the goal wasn't just to pull out the hair, it was to pull out chunks of skin and follicle tissue. The more damage, the better, because damage meant the hair might not grow back. But for the truly committed to eyebrow elimination, there were more extreme options. The pumice stone technique was exactly what it sounds like, using volcanic rock to literally sand the eyebrows off your face. Women would rub pumice stones against their brow areas until the skin was raw and bleeding, believing that the trauma would prevent regrowth. The vinegar acid treatment involved applying concentrated vinegar to the eyebrow area and covering it with cloth soaked in more vinegar. The acid would slowly eat away at the hair follicles and surrounding skin, creating permanent scarring that prevented future hair growth. But the most horrifying technique of all was arsenic paste application. Yes, arsenic. The same poison that medieval people were already putting on their faces as makeup was now being used in concentrated doses specifically for eyebrow removal. The arsenic paste would be applied directly to the eyebrow area and left on overnight. The chemical burn was so severe that women would wake up with their eyebrows literally falling off in chunks, along with significant portions of the surrounding skin. The pain was described in medieval beauty manuals as divine suffering, the idea being that enduring this agony was proof of your commitment to spiritual and aesthetic purity. But here's what really gets me about this whole eyebrow elimination obsession. They had professional eyebrow removal specialists. This wasn't just women doing amateur beauty treatments at home. This was a legitimate profession with training, certification, and specialised equipment. These specialists, called brow barbers, would travel from castle to castle offering their services. They had custom-made tools, heated metal scrapers, specialised acid applicators, and various devices for holding victims, clients, completely still during the procedures. The really successful brow barbers would develop signature techniques and secret formulas. Some specialised in single-session complete removal, essentially destroying both eyebrows in one horrifically painful appointment. Others offered the gradual fade approach, slowly eliminating the eyebrows over multiple sessions to reduce the shock to the client's system. The costs were absolutely insane. A complete professional eyebrow elimination could cost the equivalent of $15,000 in today's money. But the social pressure was so intense that families would mortgage their homes to ensure their daughters could achieve the fashionable brow-free look. And maintenance. Once you'd eliminated your eyebrows, you couldn't just forget about them, because nature is persistent, and hair follicles are surprisingly resilient. Even after the most extreme removal procedures, some hair would eventually try to grow back. This meant regular touch-up sessions involving reapplication of acid compounds, heated metal treatments, or precision plucking of individual hairs the moment they appeared. Some women had servants whose only job was daily eyebrow inspection and immediate hair removal. These brow watchers would examine their employer's face every morning with magnifying tools, searching for any sign of hair regrowth that needed immediate elimination. The psychological impact of this constant surveillance and maintenance was devastating. Women lived in constant fear that someone would notice a stray eyebrow hair, which could destroy their social reputation instantly. But here's where this story gets even more disturbing: the regional variations in eyebrow elimination techniques. In France, they developed something called the silk burn, using silk threads soaked in acid to create precise lines of chemical burns across the eyebrow area. The goal was to create decorative scarring patterns that would both prevent hair growth and serve as a status symbol. Italian women pioneered the use of heated metal stamps that would burn geometric designs into the eyebrow area. These burns would heal into permanent scars that created the illusion of decorative tattoos, while ensuring no hair could ever grow in those patterns. English women went for complete elimination using a technique called the Tudor scrape, systematically removing not just the eyebrows but also the skin and tissue underneath, creating permanent indentations where the eyebrows used to be. The German approach was perhaps the most extreme. They would use a combination of acid and heated metal to create what they called the smooth dome, essentially burning away everything from the eyelashes to the hairline to create one continuous curved surface. Now, you might think that surely someone pointed out how insane this all was. And you'd be right. There were critics. Medical practitioners of the time warned about the dangers of facial acid burns and deliberate tissue destruction. But the social pressure was so overwhelming that even medical warnings were ignored. In fact, having intact eyebrows became so associated with lower social classes that physicians were pressured to offer eyebrow removal as a medical service to avoid being seen as catering only to peasants. The art of the period tells the whole story. Look at any portrait of a noblewoman from the 14th through 16th centuries, and you'll see faces that look almost alien to modern eyes. Smooth, featureless expanses where eyebrows should be, creating expressions that appear simultaneously serene and slightly disturbing. But the most tragic part of this whole eyebrow elimination obsession was what it did to facial expressions and emotional communication. Eyebrows are crucial for human emotional expression. They convey surprise, concern, confusion, anger, and dozens of other subtle emotional states. When you remove them completely, you eliminate a huge portion of the face's ability to communicate emotion. Medieval women who had undergone complete eyebrow elimination often appeared emotionally flat or expressionless, unable to convey the full range of human feeling through their facial expressions. This created a feedback loop where emotional restraint became associated with upper-class refinement. The health consequences were predictably horrific. Chronic infections from repeated chemical burns, permanent nerve damage from acid applications, and vision problems from damage to the tissue around the eyes were all common among women who had undergone extensive eyebrow removal. Some women lost the ability to close their eyes properly due to scar tissue formation. Others developed chronic pain from nerve damage that lasted for the rest of their lives. But perhaps most tragically, many women became completely dependent on makeup and headwear to create the illusion of normal facial features. Without eyebrows to frame their eyes, their faces looked so unnatural that they couldn't appear in public without elaborate cosmetic reconstruction. Now, before we get too comfortable feeling superior to these medieval beauty extremists, let's talk about the modern parallels that might hit a little too close to home. The psychological mechanism behind eyebrow elimination is identical to modern beauty trends that encourage people to drastically alter their natural features. We may not be burning off our eyebrows with acid, but we are using lasers, chemicals, and surgery to achieve equally dramatic changes to our natural appearance. The social pressure aspect is also eerily familiar. How many people today feel they can't appear in public without makeup, filters, or other artificial enhancements? How many have internalized the message that their natural features are somehow inadequate or offensive? And the professional beauty industry that grew up around eyebrow elimination. That's basically the modern cosmetic surgery industry, complete with specialists, signature techniques, and costs that can bankrupt families. The most disturbing parallel is how the beauty industry creates problems that don't exist in nature and then sells increasingly extreme solutions. Medieval people convinced themselves that eyebrows were ugly and needed to be eliminated. We've convinced ourselves that aging, body fat, natural skin texture, and dozens of other normal human characteristics are problems that need to be fixed. The eyebrow apocalypse teaches us something terrifying about human psychology. When society decides that a natural feature is unacceptable, people will go to absolutely insane lengths to eliminate it, even when doing so causes permanent damage to their health and well-being. These medieval women weren't crazy or stupid. They were responding logically to an illogical social system that punished natural appearance more severely than it punished self-mutilation, and that system is still with us. It's just gotten more sophisticated in how it markets self-destruction as self-improvement. If this exploration of medieval facial hair elimination has made you think differently about beauty standards and the extremes people will go to meet them, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these destructive patterns work. Now, after covering toxic makeup, skull reshaping, and eyebrow elimination, you might think we've reached the peak of medieval beauty insanity. But you'd be wrong, because we haven't even talked about what medieval people did with colour. Specifically, how they turned the simple act of having rosy cheeks into a moral battleground that could literally get you excommunicated from the church. We're about to explore the world of medieval blush, where the difference between looking healthy and looking like a prostitute was measured in microscopic amounts of red pigment, where the wrong shade of pink could destroy your reputation overnight, and where the Catholic Church had official positions on acceptable cheek colour. This is the story of how medieval society turned blushing into both an art form and a sin, and how women navigated a beauty standard so precise and so morally loaded that a single makeup mistake could ruin their lives forever. Get ready for a deep dive into the most psychologically complex beauty trend we've covered yet, one that required women to look naturally beautiful while using completely artificial means, and to appear modest while engaging in what the church considered vanity bordering on witchcraft. Welcome back to our medieval beauty nightmare. where we've already covered self-poisoning, skull modification, and facial hair elimination. But now we're entering perhaps the most psychologically twisted territory yet. A beauty trend so morally complex that it required women to become master manipulators of both chemistry and theology. Picture this. You're a young woman in 1450s England, getting ready for Sunday Mass. You carefully apply the tiniest amount of red pigment to your cheeks, so little that it's barely visible. Too much, and you'll be branded a harlot. Too little, and you'll look sickly. Get the shade wrong, and you might be accused of witchcraft. But here's the kicker. You can't let anyone know you're wearing any colour at all. Because officially, makeup is a sin. Vanity could get you excommunicated. And yet, appearing completely pale could mean you're unmarriageable. Welcome to the world of medieval blush, where women had to look naturally beautiful using completely artificial means, where the Catholic Church had official colour guidelines for acceptable cheek tones, and where a single makeup mistake could destroy your life in ways that go far beyond social embarrassment. This is the story of how medieval society turned the simple act of having rosy cheeks into a moral tightrope walk that required the precision of a chemist, the cunning of a spy, and the theological knowledge of a priest. Let me explain the impossible situation medieval women found themselves in when it came to facial colour. The church taught that vanity was a deadly sin, and applying artificial colour to your face was the very definition of vanity. Wearing obvious makeup was literally considered evidence of spiritual corruption, the kind of thing that could get you publicly shamed, socially ostracised, or even accused of consorting with demons. But at the same time, appearing completely colourless was seen as evidence of illness, moral deficiency, or worse, spiritual deadness. A woman with no colour in her cheeks was considered either dying or already spiritually dead. The ideal was to have what they called the virgin's blush, a natural-looking rosy glow that suggested youth, health, and spiritual purity. But achieving this look naturally was impossible for most women, especially those who spent their lives indoors avoiding the sun to maintain fashionable pale skin. So medieval women had to become masters of what we might call stealth makeup, creating artificial colour that looked completely natural while being absolutely undetectable as artificial enhancement. The precision required was insane. We're talking about colour application so subtle that it could pass the scrutiny of priests, rival women looking for social ammunition, and husbands who might report their wives to church authorities for vanity. The margin for error was literally microscopic. Too much pigment and you'd be labelled a prostitute. The wrong undertone and you might be accused of using supernatural means to enhance your beauty, which was dangerously close to witchcraft accusations. But here's where this gets really fascinating. They developed an entire underground science around achieving the perfect natural blush. The ingredient sourcing alone was like a medieval drug operation. Women would secretly harvest specific types of berries at particular times of year, when their pigment content was optimal. They developed networks for trading rare red minerals and insects that produced the most natural-looking dyes. Beetroot was the entry-level option, but it had problems. The colour was too bright, too obvious, and it didn't last long enough to be practical. Plus, beetroot juice had a distinctive smell that could give you away if someone got too close. Strawberry and raspberry extraction was more sophisticated. Women would crush these fruits and strain the juice through multiple layers of cloth to remove any fibre that might be visible on the skin. But the real art was in the dilution, finding the exact ratio of fruit juice to rosewater that would create believable colour. Mulberry juice was considered the premium option because it produced the most natural-looking red tones, but mulberries were expensive and seasonal, so this was mainly available to wealthy women who could afford to stockpile the juice or pay for year-round access. But for the truly committed to makeup perfection, there was cochineal, red dye made from crushed insects. Yes, medieval women were literally grinding up bugs and painting them on their faces, but cochineal produced the most vibrant and long-lasting red colour available, and when properly diluted, it could create believable blush tones that wouldn't fade throughout the day. The preparation process was incredibly complex. The insects had to be ground to a specific consistency, mixed with binding agents like egg whites or plant oils, then diluted to the perfect concentration. Too concentrated and it looked fake. Too diluted and it provided no colour benefit. But here's the really twisted part. The church wasn't just passively disapproving of makeup. They had active surveillance systems to catch women using artificial colour enhancement. Priests would inspect women's faces during confession, looking for signs of artificial colour application. They had training in identifying different types of makeup and the telltale signs of each method. Some churches even had special lighting designed to reveal makeup that might be invisible under normal conditions. The penalties for being caught wearing obvious makeup could be severe: public shaming, forced penance, exclusion from communion, and in extreme cases, accusations of witchcraft that could lead to trial and execution. But the social pressure to have coloured cheeks was relentless, so women developed increasingly sophisticated methods to avoid detection. Application technique became an art form that required years to master. Women would use their fingertips to apply colour in microscopic amounts, building up layers so gradually that each individual application was invisible. But the cumulative effect created the desired glow. Some women developed what they called the prayer technique, applying colour while kneeling in prayer position, using the excuse of devotional activity to hide the makeup application process. Others used the morning devotion method, applying blush while doing their morning prayers, when servants and family members were expected to leave them alone for spiritual contemplation. The most sophisticated users developed emergency removal techniques, ways to quickly eliminate all traces of artificial colour if they suspected they were about to be inspected by church authorities. But the regional variations in blush standards make this story even more complex. In France, the court demanded what they called rose nobility, a specific shade of pink that was supposed to indicate aristocratic breeding. French women developed complex mixing techniques to achieve this exact colour, and using the wrong shade could indicate that you were trying to appear more noble than your actual birth status. Italian women were expected to achieve Madonna pink, a colour that specifically referenced the Virgin Mary's complexion in religious art. This required not just the right colour, but the right application pattern that mimicked the way light fell on Mary's face in paintings. English women had to navigate Tudor rose standards, a colour that was supposed to represent English national identity. The shade had to be patriotic as well as beautiful, and foreign-influenced colours could be seen as evidence of political disloyalty. Spanish women dealt with the most complex requirements of all. Their blush had to indicate not just beauty and health, but also limpieza de sangre, or blood purity. The wrong colour choices could be interpreted as evidence of Jewish or Moorish ancestry, which could have devastating consequences. The costs of maintaining perfect blush were astronomical when you factor in all the hidden expenses. Women needed secure storage for their illegal makeup supplies, often building secret compartments in their chambers, or paying servants to hide materials in various locations throughout their households. They needed backup supplies in case their primary stash was discovered and confiscated. They needed to maintain relationships with multiple suppliers in case one source was compromised. They needed to regularly replace their supplies because natural pigments degraded quickly, especially the insect-based ones that produced the best colours. Most expensive of all, they needed what we might call insurance bribes, regular payments to servants, clergy, or other potential informants to ensure their makeup use wouldn't be reported to authorities. When you add up all these costs, maintaining perfect medieval blush could easily cost the equivalent of $20,000 per year in today's money. But the psychological toll was perhaps even more devastating than the financial cost. Women lived in constant fear of discovery. They had to maintain perfect colour throughout the day while appearing completely natural. They had to be ready to explain any colour in their cheeks as natural causes, exercise, weather, emotion, or illness. They developed elaborate cover stories for why their cheeks might be flushed, and had to be consistent in these stories across multiple interactions with different people who might compare notes. The stress of maintaining this deception while navigating the complex social and religious requirements often led to what medieval medical texts describe as beauty melancholy, a form of anxiety disorder specifically related to appearance pressure. Now, you might think this level of makeup paranoia is purely historical, but the psychological mechanisms are alive and well in modern beauty culture. Think about the current obsession with no makeup. The idea that the best makeup is completely undetectable. We're still telling women that they need to look perfect while appearing completely natural. The social media pressure to maintain a flawless appearance while claiming it's all natural is essentially the same dynamic that medieval women faced with church authorities. The tools have changed, but the fundamental deception remains the same. We still have beauty standards that require women to look naturally perfect in ways that are impossible without artificial enhancement, then shame them for using the artificial enhancement that's necessary to meet the standard. The regional colour expectations have evolved into brand loyalties and trend cycles, but the underlying pressure to conform to specific colour standards remains just as intense, and the surveillance aspect that's basically social media, where every appearance is documented, analysed, and compared to impossible standards by audiences that are actively looking for reasons to criticise. The art of strategic blushing reveals something disturbing about how beauty standards function as tools of social control. When you make the requirements for acceptable appearance so precise and so contradictory that they require constant vigilance and deception to meet, you create a population that's too busy managing their appearance to challenge the system that oppresses them. Medieval women spent enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources on achieving the perfect blush, not because they were vain, but because the social consequences of not meeting these impossible standards were genuinely devastating. And we're doing the exact same thing now. We just call it self-care instead of vanity, and we use Instagram filters instead of Beetlejuice. If this exploration of medieval makeup as moral warfare has opened your eyes to how beauty standards function as systems of control, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand these patterns. Now, if you think navigating the moral complexities of cheek colour was complicated, wait until you hear about what medieval people did to their hair. Because we're about to enter a world where hair colour wasn't just about beauty. It was about spiritual salvation, racial hierarchy, and literally alchemical transformation of your entire identity. We're talking about beauty practices that involved sitting in the sun for hours with urine-soaked hair, chemical processes that could blind you if they went wrong, and colour treatments so expensive that entire kingdoms went into debt to supply their queens with the right shade of blonde. This is the story of medieval hair alchemy, where women didn't just dye their hair, they attempted to fundamentally transform their genetic identity through chemistry, prayer, and sheer force of will, where the difference between blonde and brunette could determine whether you were considered blessed by God or cursed by nature. Get ready to discover beauty practices that make everything we've talked about so far look absolutely reasonable by comparison. And we're back for what might be the most chemically dangerous segment of our medieval beauty journey so far. If you thought applying acid to your eyebrows was extreme, prepare yourself for beauty practices that turned hair care into literal alchemy, complete with toxic fumes, potential blindness, and chemical processes so complex they required their own laboratories. Picture this. It's a sunny afternoon in 1480s Venice, and you're sitting on your rooftop wearing nothing but a chemise, a massive sun hat with no crown, and hair soaked in a mixture of human urine, sulphur, and honey. You've been sitting here for 6 hours. Your scalp is burning. The smell is making you nauseous. But you're willing to endure all of this because having the wrong hair colour could literally determine whether you're considered blessed by God or cursed by nature. Welcome to the world of medieval hair alchemy, where changing your hair colour wasn't just about beauty. It was about fundamentally transforming your spiritual and social identity through chemistry, prayer, and sheer determination to defy your own genetics. This is the story of how medieval Europe became so obsessed with blonde hair that they turned hair lightening into a form of religious devotion, created an international trade network for hair bleaching ingredients, and convinced an entire civilization that your natural hair colour was evidence of your spiritual worth. Let me start by explaining why blonde hair became the medieval equivalent of winning the genetic lottery. In medieval Christian theology, light was associated with divinity, purity, and spiritual elevation. Dark was associated with sin, earthiness, and spiritual corruption. This wasn't subtle symbolism. This was official church doctrine that influenced everything from art to legal proceedings. Blonde hair, especially the pale, almost white blonde that was considered ideal, was seen as evidence that you carried divine light within your very being. You were literally glowing with God's favour, made visible through your hair colour. But here's where this gets really twisted. They believed that hair colour could be changed through spiritual devotion combined with the right chemical processes. If you prayed hard enough while applying the right treatments, you could theoretically transform your spiritual nature by transforming your hair colour. This wasn't just vanity, this was salvation through chemistry. The most popular hair lightening method was what they called the Venetian blonde process, and it was basically controlled chemical warfare against your own scalp. The process began with what they delicately called the golden water, a mixture that typically included human urine, preferably from young children, because apparently child urine was considered more potent. Sulfur powder, alum, honey, and various plant extracts depending on the season and availability. But here's the part that really gets me. They had specific recipes for different starting hair colours. Brunettes needed stronger concentrations of sulfur and longer processing times. Redheads required special additives to neutralise the copper tones, and black hair that required treatments so extreme they were basically controlled poisoning. The application process was like a medieval science experiment. Women would saturate their hair with this toxic mixture, then sit in direct sunlight for hours while wearing a special hat called a solana, essentially a sun hat with the crown cut out so their hair could be exposed to sun while their face remained protected. The solana became such an important piece of equipment that they were custom made by specialised craftsmen, with different designs for different hair types and treatment intensities. Some had adjustable brims for different sun angles. Others had built-in ventilation systems to help with the toxic fumes. The really wealthy women had solana servants whose job was to monitor the hair lightening process, adjusting the hat position throughout the day to optimise sun exposure while preventing chemical burns that were too severe. Because yes, chemical burns were expected. In fact, they were considered a positive sign that the treatment was working. The more your scalp burned, the more dramatic the colour change would be. But the sun sitting was just the beginning of the Venetian blonde process. Between sun sessions, women would apply what they called maintenance mixtures, additional chemical treatments designed to continue the lightening process even when the sun wasn't available. These often included limeade from wood ash, which could literally dissolve hair if the concentration was too strong. The really committed would do multiple cycles per week. Monday would be preparation, washing the hair with special soaps designed to strip away natural oils and open the hair cuticle for better chemical penetration. Tuesday through Thursday would be active treatment days, applying the toxic mixtures and sitting in the sun for hours at a time. Friday would be recovery day, applying oils and other treatments to prevent the hair from completely dissolving from chemical damage. Saturday would be assessment day, evaluating the colour change and planning adjustments for the following week. Sunday was supposed to be rest day, but many women would secretly do prayer lightening, applying mild treatments while attending church, believing that combining chemical processes with spiritual devotion would enhance the results. The timeline for achieving dramatic colour change could stretch for months or even years, and during this entire time, women had to deal with hair that was progressively more damaged, scalps that were chronically irritated, and the constant risk of chemical accidents that could cause permanent injury. But here's where this story gets even more insane. The ingredient sourcing for hair lightening became an international industry. Saffron, one of the premium hair lightening ingredients, was worth more than gold by weight. A single hair lightening treatment using real saffron could cost the equivalent of $50,000 in today's money. Wealthy women would literally bankrupt their families to afford saffron-based hair treatments. The saffron trade routes that supplied European hair lightening became geopolitically significant. Wars were fought over access to saffron-producing regions. Trade agreements included specific provisions for saffron allocation for cosmetic use. Some kingdoms established royal saffron reserves specifically for the hair lightening needs of their courts. Having access to unlimited saffron for hair treatments became a symbol of ultimate royal power. But saffron was just the premium option. For those who couldn't afford liquid gold for their hair, there were other ingredients that created their own international trade networks. Chamomile was the middle-class option, and entire regions of Europe specialised in growing chamomile specifically for hair lightening. The quality differences between chamomile from different regions led to the development of specialised grading systems and authentication methods to prevent fraud. Onion juice was considered an effective budget option, but it required specific types of onions harvested at particular times of year. This led to seasonal onion markets specifically for cosmetic use, with prices that fluctuated based on hair lightening demand. Rhubarb root became so valuable for hair lightening that it was regulated like a controlled substance in some regions. The export of high-quality rhubarb root was restricted to prevent other kingdoms from achieving superior hair lightening results. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval hair lightening was the urine trade. Yes, there was literally a market for human urine based on its effectiveness for hair lightening. Urine from young children was considered most potent, followed by urine from pregnant women, then urine from virgins. There were quality standards for cosmetic urine, diet restrictions for people whose urine would be used for hair lightening, professional urine collectors who specialized in sourcing the highest quality specimens for wealthy clients. Some noble families employed full-time urine suppliers, people whose only job was to maintain the diet and lifestyle necessary to produce premium hair lightening urine. The really wealthy would import urine from other regions believed to have superior qualities. Venetian urine was considered the best in Europe, leading to a thriving export market for Venetian bodily fluids. Now, let's talk about the health consequences of medieval hair alchemy, because they were predictably horrific. Chronic sulfur exposure led to respiratory problems that often lasted for life. Women who did regular hair lightening treatments frequently developed what we would now recognize as chemical pneumonia from inhaling toxic fumes. The scalp damage was often permanent. Many women lost significant portions of their hair to chemical burns. Some developed chronic infections that never fully healed. Eye damage was common because the fumes from hair lightening treatments could cause corneal burns. Some women lost their vision entirely from chemical exposure during hair lightening sessions. Skin sensitization meant that women who did extensive hair lightening often became allergic to dozens of common substances, making normal life increasingly difficult as they aged. But perhaps most tragically, many women became psychologically dependent on the hair lightening process. They couldn't stop even when the health consequences became severe, because reverting to their natural hair colour felt like spiritual and social suicide. The regional variations in hair lightening techniques created fascinating cultural differences that reveal how deeply this obsession had penetrated European society. French women developed what they called the cathedral blonde, a hair colour that was supposed to match the golden light that filtered through church windows. Achieving this required specific timing of treatments to coincide with religious festivals, because they believed spiritual energy would enhance the chemical processes. Italian women pioneered the Renaissance gold technique, which involved multiple different chemical processes applied in sequence to create hair that appeared to change colour in different lighting conditions. This required master-level chemistry knowledge and often took years to perfect. English women developed the Royal Platinum method, which aimed for hair so light it was almost white. This required the most extreme chemical treatments and had the highest rate of permanent injury, but it was considered the ultimate status symbol. German women created the Alpine glow technique, which used specialized minerals from mountain regions to create unique color effects. This led to mining operations specifically for cosmetic minerals and the development of geological expertise in service of beauty. Spanish women developed the most complex system of all, graduated lightening, that created subtle color variations throughout the hair to mimic the way natural blonde hair looks in different lighting. This required multiple different chemical formulations applied with precise timing and placement. But here's what really gets me about this medieval hair obsession. The modern parallels are absolutely uncanny. We still associate blonde hair with higher social status, greater attractiveness, and even intelligence despite all evidence to the contrary. The dumb blonde stereotype exists precisely because blonde hair has been so associated with privilege that we assume blonde women haven't had to develop other qualities. The modern hair lightening industry is worth billions of dollars annually, and the chemical processes we use aren't fundamentally different from medieval methods, just more refined and slightly less likely to cause immediate injury. We still have regional preferences for specific shades of blonde. We still have celebrity colorists who charge thousands of dollars for hair lightening treatments. We still have international trade networks for hair lightening ingredients. The psychological dependency aspect is still there too. How many people do you know who absolutely cannot function without regular hair colour maintenance? Who feel like their natural hair colour is somehow inadequate or unprofessional? And the spiritual component hasn't disappeared either. It's just been secularized. We still talk about hair colour in terms of transformation, self-expression, and personal empowerment. We've just replaced religious language with therapeutic language. The golden hair obsession reveals something fundamental about how beauty standards function as systems of social hierarchy. When you make a genetic trait that only occurs naturally in a small percentage of the population into the ultimate beauty ideal, you create a massive market for artificial methods to achieve that trait. But more than that, you create a system where people's sense of self-worth becomes tied to their ability to successfully fake a genetic characteristic they don't naturally possess. Medieval women weren't stupid for sitting in the sun with urine in their hair. They were responding rationally to a social system that punished genetic diversity and rewarded conformity to arbitrary physical standards. And we're still doing the exact same thing. We've just gotten better at marketing it as choice and empowerment instead of acknowledging it as conformity and desperation. If this exploration of medieval hair alchemy has made you think differently about modern beauty standards and the extremes people go to meet them, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns perpetuate themselves across centuries. Now, if you think the chemical warfare we've been discussing so far represents the peak of medieval beauty extremism, you're about to discover you've been thinking too small. Because we haven't even talked about what medieval people did to their entire bodies, not just their faces, not just their hair, but their complete physical structure from head to toe. We're about to enter the world of medieval body engineering, where fashion wasn't just about clothes, it was about literally reshaping the human form through mechanical compression, structural modification, and what can only be described as architectural approaches to anatomy. This is the story of how medieval people turned the human body into a construction project, complete with internal framework, external supports, and engineering principles that would make modern plastic surgeons look like amateurs. Get ready to discover beauty practices that required blueprints, structural calculations, and sometimes actual construction crews to implement. We're talking about fashion that needed building permits. Welcome back to our medieval beauty engineering project, where we've already covered chemical warfare, architectural skull modification, and industrial-grade hair alchemy. But now we're entering territory that makes everything we've discussed look like child's play, because we're about to explore how medieval people turned the human body into a literal construction site. Picture this. You're a 16-year-old noble girl in 1470s Burgundy, and your mother has just hired a team of specialized craftsmen to essentially rebuild your torso. Over the next 6 months, they will use a combination of whalebone, metal wire, wooden planks, and advanced engineering principles to compress your ribcage, relocate your organs, and fundamentally alter your skeletal structure. This isn't clothing. This isn't even what we would recognize as underwear. This is architectural intervention in human anatomy, and by the time they're finished, your body will literally be a different shape than nature intended. Welcome to the world of medieval body engineering, where fashion required blueprints, where getting dressed was a construction project, and where the human form was treated as raw material that needed to be improved through mechanical intervention. This is the story of how medieval Europe decided that God had made some serious design errors when creating the female body, and they were going to fix those errors using the same techniques they used to build cathedrals. Let me start by explaining the engineering philosophy behind medieval body modification, because it's more sophisticated and more disturbing than you might imagine. Medieval fashion wasn't just about looking attractive, it was about achieving geometric perfection that aligned with mathematical and spiritual ideals. The human body, in its natural state, was considered crude, imperfect, and spiritually deficient. The goal was to transform the female torso into a perfect geometric cone, narrow at the waist, expanding gradually to the hips, with the bust positioned at precisely calculated angles to create what they called divine proportions. But achieving these proportions naturally was impossible for most women, so they developed what was essentially a biomedical engineering approach to body modification. The foundation of this system was the kirtle, but calling it a kirtle is like calling a skyscraper a building. These were complex mechanical devices that required specialized knowledge to construct and operate. The internal structure began with what they called the cage, a framework of whalebone or metal ribs that literally encased the torso. This wasn't flexible like modern underwire. This was rigid architectural support that could bear significant weight and pressure. The cage was custom fitted to each woman's body through a process that was part tailoring, part medical examination, part engineering consultation. Measurements were taken not just of circumference, but of bone density, muscle distribution, and organ placement, because the goal wasn't just to change how the body looked in clothes, it was to permanently reshape the body itself. The compression mechanisms were the really terrifying part. The Kirtle used a combination of lacing systems, mechanical winches, and what were essentially medieval torture devices to gradually compress the ribcage into the desired shape. The lacing alone required specialised knowledge to operate safely. Too loose and you wouldn't achieve the fashionable silhouette. Too tight and you could literally crush your own organs. The optimal tension had to be calculated based on the woman's age, health status, and tolerance for internal rearrangement. But here's where this gets really disturbing. They understood that they were causing permanent physiological changes, and they considered this a positive feature of the system. The compression process was designed to gradually move the ribs inward and upward, push the liver and stomach into different positions, and reduce lung capacity to create the desired tiny waist measurements. Women who underwent proper Kirtle training from adolescence would develop permanently altered bone structure. Their ribs would actually grow in different directions. Their organs would settle into new positions. Their breathing patterns would change permanently. This wasn't reversible. Once you'd been properly shaped by medieval body engineering, your anatomy was permanently modified. The fitting process required teams of specialists working together like a medical procedure. The Kirtle master was the lead engineer, responsible for overall design and structural integrity. They had to understand anatomy, engineering principles, and fashion requirements. The bone worker specialised in shaping and installing the whalebone or metal framework. This required knowledge of metallurgy, materials science, and precision craftsmanship. The lace master controlled the compression systems and was responsible for the gradual tightening process that could take months to complete safely. The breath trainer taught women how to breathe efficiently with dramatically reduced lung capacity, because fainting from oxygen deprivation was considered embarrassing and unfashionable. The process of achieving the perfect medieval silhouette could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on how dramatically the body needed to be reshaped. The timeline was methodical and scientific. Week 1 involved initial fitting and assessment. The Kirtle would be worn for just a few hours daily while the body adapted to the new pressure patterns. By month 2, wearing time would increase to most of the day, with gradual tightening of the compression systems as the body adapted. Month 4 typically marked the beginning of what they called serious reshaping, compression levels that caused visible changes to torso proportions and required medical monitoring. Month 6 was usually when permanent skeletal changes became apparent, and the fitting process would be adjusted based on how the bone structure was responding to the pressure. The final fitting at month 8 or 10 would lock in the permanent body modifications, and the woman would essentially be committed to wearing structural support for the rest of her life. Because once your ribs had been compressed and your organs relocated, removing the structural support could cause internal collapse and potentially death. But the Kirtle was just the foundation layer. Medieval body engineering involved multiple additional systems for reshaping different parts of the anatomy. Sleeve construction required separate engineering for arm positioning. The goal was to create sleeves so tight they restricted blood flow, forcing the arms into specific positions that were considered graceful and spiritual. Hip enhancement involved padding systems that could add up to 8 inches to the hip circumference, while maintaining the illusion of natural curves. These weren't simple padding. These were structured mechanical systems that redistributed weight and created specific movement patterns. Leg positioning involved what were essentially leg braces built into the undergarments to force the legs into fashionable stances even while walking. The neck support systems were designed to hold the head at specific angles that were considered intellectually and spiritually superior to natural head positioning. Even finger positioning was controlled through specialized gloves that forced the hands into permanently graceful configurations. The really wealthy women had what were called full-body systems, integrated mechanical frameworks that controlled the positioning and movement of every part of the body from head to toe. These full-body systems required teams of servants to operate. Getting dressed became a group activity involving multiple people with specialized knowledge of the various mechanical systems. Some of these systems were so complex they required maintenance schedules like machinery. The whalebone elements needed regular inspection and replacement. The metal components required oiling and adjustment. The fabric elements needed specialized cleaning and repair. The costs were astronomical when you factor in the initial construction, the team of specialists required for fitting and maintenance, and the ongoing operational expenses. A complete medieval body engineering system could cost the equivalent of buying a modern luxury car every year just for the maintenance and updates required to keep the mechanical systems functioning properly. But the social pressure was relentless. A woman who couldn't achieve the fashionable silhouette was essentially unmarriageable among the nobility. Parents would go into massive debt to ensure their daughters could afford proper body engineering. The health consequences were predictably devastating and permanent. Organ displacement led to chronic digestive problems that lasted for life. Women who underwent extensive body reshaping frequently suffered from what we would now recognise as severe gastrointestinal disorders. Respiratory restriction meant that many women lived in a constant state of mild oxygen deprivation, leading to chronic fatigue, poor concentration, and increased susceptibility to illness. Skeletal deformation often resulted in chronic pain conditions that became worse with age, as the artificially shaped bones deteriorated under the stress of their unnatural positions. Circulatory problems from compression clothing led to blood clots, varicose veins, and other vascular issues that could be life-threatening. But perhaps most tragically, many women became so psychologically dependent on the structural support that they couldn't function without it. Removing the mechanical systems could cause panic attacks because their natural body shape felt foreign and unacceptable. The regional variations in body engineering reveal how widespread and sophisticated this system had become across medieval Europe. French court fashion demanded what they called the cathedral silhouette, a body shape that mimicked the proportions of Gothic architecture. This required extreme waist compression combined with structured hip expansion to create proportions that were mathematically aligned with architectural principles. Italian Renaissance fashion focused on the classical column, a body shape inspired by ancient Greek and Roman sculpture. This required different compression patterns designed to create the illusion of marble statue proportions. English Tudor fashion emphasized the royal cone, a silhouette that was designed to make the wearer appear taller and more imposing. Requiring vertical compression techniques and specialized height enhancement systems, German court fashion developed the imperial cylinder, a completely straight silhouette from bust to hip that required the most extreme compression techniques and had the highest rate of serious medical complications. Spanish fashion created the celestial triangle, a body shape that was supposed to represent perfect spiritual geometry, requiring compression systems so complex they took teams of engineers to design and implement. But here's what really disturbs me about medieval body engineering. The modern parallels are absolutely everywhere, and they're getting more extreme rather than less. Think about modern shapewear, compression garments, and waist training systems. We're still using mechanical compression to reshape our bodies. We've just gotten better at marketing it as health and wellness, instead of acknowledging it as body modification. The modern cosmetic surgery industry uses many of the same principles as medieval body engineering. The idea that the natural human form is inadequate and needs to be improved through mechanical intervention. We still have beauty standards that require achieving proportions that are impossible for most people to attain naturally. And we still shame people for not meeting these artificial standards. The psychological dependency aspect is still there too. How many people do you know who absolutely cannot function without their shapewear, push-up bras, or other mechanical body modification devices? And the economic aspect has only gotten worse. The modern beauty industry makes more money annually than many countries' entire GDP, and much of that money goes toward products and procedures designed to mechanically alter natural body proportions. The physics of medieval fashion reveals something fundamental about how beauty standards function as systems of control. When you convince people that their natural body shape is inherently inadequate, you create a massive market for increasingly extreme methods to artificially achieve impossible proportions. But more than that, you create a population that's literally shaped by the beauty standards they're trying to meet. Medieval women weren't just wearing restrictive clothing, they were allowing their skeletons to be permanently altered to conform to fashion requirements. And we're still doing the same thing. We're just using surgery and injectable fillers instead of whalebone and metal wire. If this exploration of medieval body engineering has opened your eyes to how beauty standards can literally reshape people's bodies and lives, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns perpetuate themselves. Now, if you think mechanical body reshaping represents the ultimate extreme in medieval beauty obsession, you're about to discover that we haven't even touched on the most psychologically devastating beauty trend of all. Because we haven't talked about what medieval people did to their teeth and smiles, and I'm not just talking about dental hygiene, though that's horrifying enough. I'm talking about a beauty standard so twisted that it convinced people that showing any sign of happiness or pleasure was spiritually dangerous and socially unacceptable. We're about to explore the medieval war on smiling, where having an attractive smile could get you accused of vanity, where showing your teeth was considered as inappropriate as public nudity, and where the ultimate beauty ideal was to look like you had never experienced joy in your entire life. This is the story of how medieval Europe decided that happiness was ugly, that dental health was vanity, and that the perfect facial expression was one of perpetual spiritual suffering. Get ready for beauty standards that would make modern influencers look like optimists, and we're back for what might be the most psychologically disturbing segment of our medieval beauty journey yet. If you thought reshaping your entire skeleton was extreme, prepare yourself for a beauty standard so twisted that it convinced an entire civilization that showing signs of happiness was morally dangerous and aesthetically offensive. Picture this. You're at a royal feast in 1460s France, surrounded by the most beautiful and wealthy people in Europe. But as you look around the room, you notice something deeply unsettling. Nobody is smiling, not because they're unhappy, but because opening your mouth to reveal your teeth was considered as socially unacceptable as showing up naked. In fact, a genuine smile showing teeth could get you labelled as everything from spiritually corrupt to mentally unstable. The ideal facial expression was what they called divine melancholy, a look of perpetual, elegant suffering that suggested you were too spiritually refined to experience earthly pleasures. Welcome to the medieval war on dental expression, where having healthy teeth was suspicious, where smiling was sinful, and where the ultimate beauty goal was to look like you had never experienced a moment of joy in your entire life. This is the story of how medieval Europe declared war on one of the most basic human expressions of happiness, and created beauty standards that would make modern depression look like enthusiasm. Let me start by explaining the dental reality that shaped medieval beauty standards, because it's even worse than you might imagine. By the age of 30, most medieval people had lost at least half their teeth to decay, infection, or mechanical damage. By 40, having any functional teeth at all was considered fortunate. By 50, a completely toothless mouth was not just common but expected. This wasn't entirely due to poor hygiene, though hygiene was certainly a factor. The medieval diet was incredibly hard on teeth. Bread was often filled with grit from stone-grinding wheels. Sugar wasn't widely available, but honey and dried fruits created their own dental disasters, and the ale and wine that made up a significant portion of daily fluid intake were highly acidic. But here's what's really disturbing. Instead of developing better dental care, medieval society simply decided that having good teeth was aesthetically undesirable and morally suspect. The reasoning was both practical and theological. If most people had terrible teeth, then having good teeth made you stand out in ways that were considered spiritually problematic. Good teeth suggested vanity, excessive attention to physical appearance, and possibly supernatural intervention. There were actual theological debates about whether maintaining healthy teeth was compatible with Christian virtue. Some religious authorities argued that dental care was a form of vanity that distracted from spiritual development. The result was a beauty standard that actively discouraged dental health and made tooth loss into a mark of spiritual maturity. But the smile suppression went far beyond just hiding bad teeth. Even people with relatively healthy teeth were expected to keep their mouths firmly closed at all times in polite society. The ideal mouth position was what they called the virgin's seal, lips pressed together in a tight line that revealed no hint of the teeth or tongue beneath. Any relaxation of this position was considered unseemly. Laughter was particularly problematic. Open-mouthed laughter that revealed teeth was seen as evidence of spiritual corruption, lack of self-control, and possibly demonic influence. Appropriate laughter was supposed to be silent, a gentle trembling of the shoulders with no facial expression change. The social consequences of inappropriate dental display were severe and immediate. A woman who smiled too broadly at a social gathering could find herself excluded from future events. A man who laughed with his mouth open could be considered unfit for serious business or political responsibilities. But here's where this gets really twisted. They developed an entire science around appropriate facial expression that was taught as part of noble education. Children from wealthy families received formal training in facial control starting around age 5. They learned exercises to strengthen the muscles needed to maintain perfect lip position for hours at a time. They practiced what were called expression drills, maintaining the ideal facial position while engaging in various activities like eating, drinking, conversation, and even physical exercise. They studied mouth geography, detailed instruction on the precise positioning of lips, teeth, and tongue that was considered acceptable in different social situations. Advanced students learned emergency concealment techniques, ways to hide spontaneous smiles or laughter that might occur despite their training. The really elite families employed expression masters, specialists whose job was to monitor and correct facial expressions throughout the day. These masters had the authority to physically correct inappropriate mouth positions and could recommend additional training for persistent violators. But the dental hygiene practices that did exist were somehow even more horrifying than complete neglect. Tooth cleaning involved scraping the teeth with abrasive materials like crushed chalk, ground bones, or even sand. The goal wasn't necessarily to clean the teeth so much as to wear them down to avoid the embarrassment of having teeth that were too prominent or well maintained. Some people deliberately damaged their teeth to achieve the fashionable look of gentle decay. They would use tools to chip or file their teeth into more socially acceptable shapes and conditions. The wealthy could afford to have their teeth professionally damaged by specialists who understood how to create the right amount of decay and discoloration without causing immediately life-threatening infections. Breath management was an entirely separate science, because even if you never opened your mouth, bad breath could still escape and create social problems. The solutions were predictably ineffective and often dangerous. People chewed on herbs, resins, and sometimes toxic plants in attempts to mask the smell of dental decay. Some wealthy people employed breath testers, servants whose job was to regularly check their employer's breath and recommend adjustments to their diet or herbal regimen. Others used primitive breath-holding techniques, essentially suffocating themselves slightly to avoid exhaling bad breath onto others during conversation. The really paranoid would communicate primarily through written notes or hand gestures to avoid any risk of breath-related social embarrassment. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval dental aesthetics was how they dealt with the people who naturally had good teeth and healthy mouths. These unfortunate individuals faced intense social pressure to disguise their dental health in order to fit in with polite society. Some would deliberately stain their teeth with various substances to create the appearance of fashionable decay. Others would use makeup techniques to darken their teeth and create artificial shadows in their mouths that suggested missing or damaged teeth. The most extreme would actually have healthy teeth removed or damaged to achieve the socially acceptable level of dental deterioration. Professional tooth damagers developed specialized techniques for creating natural-looking decay patterns that would pass inspection by other members of the nobility. The costs of maintaining fashionable dental deterioration could be significant, especially for people whose teeth were naturally resistant to decay and required ongoing professional intervention to maintain the appropriate level of damage. But the regional variations in dental beauty standards reveal how complex and sophisticated this system had become. French court society demanded what they called aristocratic erosion, a specific pattern of tooth decay that suggested a lifetime of refined living and sophisticated diet. This required careful management of which teeth were allowed to decay, and in what order. Italian Renaissance fashion emphasized classical deterioration, tooth damage patterns that were supposed to mimic ancient Roman sculpture, where teeth were often worn down or missing entirely. English Tudor society preferred royal weathering, a more subtle approach to dental decline that suggested natural aging accelerated by the burdens of leadership and responsibility. German court fashion developed philosophical erosion, tooth decay patterns that were supposed to indicate deep thinking and intellectual wear, with specific teeth targeted based on medieval theories about which parts of the mouth were connected to different types of wisdom. Spanish fashion created spiritual sublimation, the most extreme dental beauty standard that aimed for nearly complete tooth loss as evidence of successful transcendence of physical concerns. The The art and literature of the period completely reflect these dental beauty standards. Portrait paintings from this era almost never show teeth, and when they do, the teeth are depicted as darkened, worn, or incomplete. Literary descriptions of beautiful characters consistently emphasize closed mouths, sealed lips, and expressions of gentle suffering. When teeth are mentioned at all, it's usually to describe their absence or decay as marks of character and refinement. Even religious art shows saints and angels with carefully closed mouths, reinforcing the idea that dental concealment was not just socially appropriate, but spiritually superior. Now, you might think that surely the medical community of the time recognized how insane these dental beauty standards were. And you'd be partially right. Some physicians did understand the health problems caused by poor dental care, but the social pressure was so overwhelming that even medical advice was shaped by aesthetic considerations rather than health concerns. Physicians would recommend dental care techniques that prioritized achieving the fashionable appearance over maintaining actual dental health. They developed treatments designed to accelerate tooth decay in controlled ways rather than prevent it. Some medical texts from the period actually describe healthy teeth as a medical problem that needed to be corrected through therapeutic intervention. The few physicians who advocated for actual dental health were considered radical and potentially dangerous to social order. Their recommendations were often ignored or actively suppressed. But here's what really gets me about this medieval war on smiling. The modern parallels are absolutely everywhere, and they're more disturbing than the historical practices in some ways. Think about how much modern beauty culture is based on looking perpetually miserable. The resting bitch face phenomenon, the idea that smiling makes you look unprofessional or unintelligent, the social media trend of posing with deliberately expressionless faces. We still associate certain types of facial expressions with class and sophistication. A genuine, open smile is often seen as naive or unsophisticated, while a controlled, minimal expression is considered more refined and intelligent. The modern wellness industry has created its own version of dental shame, convincing people that their natural teeth are inadequate and need constant professional intervention to be socially acceptable. We've just replaced medieval tooth damagers with cosmetic dentists who convince people that their natural dental appearance is somehow flawed and needs to be artificially perfected. The psychological pressure to control facial expressions is still enormous. How many people do you know who are terrified of being photographed with their mouth open, or who practice their smile in the mirror to make sure it's not too enthusiastic or revealing? And the economic aspect has only gotten more exploitative. The modern cosmetic dentistry industry makes billions of dollars annually convincing people that their natural teeth are inadequate and need to be replaced, reshaped, or artificially enhanced. The medieval dentistry horror show reveals something fundamental about how beauty standards function as systems of psychological control. When you convince people that expressing happiness or showing signs of health is socially unacceptable, you create a population that's afraid to appear genuinely joyful or vital. Medieval people weren't stupid for hiding their smiles and damaging their teeth. They were responding rationally to a social system that punished natural expressions of health and happiness more severely than it punished self-destruction and misery. And we're still doing the same thing. We've just gotten more sophisticated about marketing depression and self-restraint as sophistication and professionalism. If this exploration of medieval smile suppression has made you think differently about modern beauty standards and the ways they discourage genuine expressions of happiness and health, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns of psychological control perpetuate themselves. Now, if you think the systematic suppression of dental health and happiness represents the ultimate extreme in medieval beauty insanity, you're about to discover that we've barely scratched the surface of medieval gender-based beauty standards, because everything we've talked about so far is focused primarily on women, but we haven't even begun to explore the completely insane beauty standards that medieval men were expected to meet. And let me tell you, medieval masculine beauty requirements make everything we've covered look like gentle self-care. We're about to enter a world where real men wore makeup, where masculine beauty required more time and expense than feminine beauty, and where the difference between being considered attractively masculine versus embarrassingly feminine could literally determine whether you lived or died in combat, politics, or social hierarchy. This is the story of medieval masculine beauty, where being a proper man required mastering cosmetics, fashion engineering, and body modification techniques that would make modern male influencers look like casual amateurs. Get ready to discover that medieval toxic masculinity was actually achieved through practices that modern society would consider completely feminine. Welcome back to our medieval beauty nightmare, where we've covered everything from lead poisoning to smile suppression. But now, we're about to shatter one of the biggest misconceptions about medieval beauty culture, the idea that these extreme standards only applied to women. Picture this. You're a young nobleman in 1480s Milan, and you've just spent 3 hours getting ready for a diplomatic meeting. Your personal grooming team has applied 6 different types of makeup to your face, arranged your hair using heated metal curling tools, adjusted your codepiece to the mathematically perfect proportions, and corseted your torso to achieve the ideal masculine silhouette. Your morning routine takes longer than most modern women's wedding preparation, costs more than a peasant family's annual income, and involves beauty practices so elaborate that one mistake could destroy your political career, your marriage prospect, and possibly your life. Welcome to the world of medieval masculine beauty, where being a real man required mastering cosmetics that would make modern drag queens jealous, where masculine fashion engineering was more complex than feminine clothing, and where male beauty standards were so extreme they literally determined who lived and died in the brutal world of medieval politics. This is the story of the forgotten half of medieval beauty culture, the half that reveals just how completely insane these standards were for everyone, regardless of gender. Let me start by destroying the myth that medieval men were somehow exempt from beauty pressure. Because the reality is that masculine beauty standards were often more extreme, more expensive, and more dangerous than anything women faced. The medieval concept of masculine beauty wasn't about looking rugged or natural. It was about achieving a specific type of refined, almost ethereal perfection that required constant maintenance and significant financial investment. The ideal medieval man was supposed to look like what they called a warrior angel, physically powerful enough to be effective in combat, but spiritually refined enough to serve in royal courts. Achieving this look naturally was impossible for most men, so they developed an entire industry around masculine beauty enhancement. The foundation of medieval male beauty was the perfect face, and achieving that required makeup skills that put most modern beauty influencers to shame. Men's makeup wasn't just about covering flaws, it was about completely reconstructing facial features to match specific masculine ideals. The goal was to create faces that looked like they belonged on religious sculptures or illuminated manuscripts. The base layer started with skin whitening, because pale skin indicated that you were wealthy enough to avoid manual labour. But men's skin whitening was often more extreme than women's, because masculine activities like combat and outdoor sports made it harder to maintain the fashionable pallor. Some men used lead-based makeup that was twice as concentrated as women's formulations, because they needed coverage that could survive sweating, physical activity, and the harsh conditions of military campaigns. The application process required specialised tools and techniques that were unique to masculine beauty culture. Men used different brushes, different blending methods, and different colour palettes than women, because the goal was to enhance masculine features rather than create feminine softness. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Men's makeup included features that women's makeup didn't, because masculine beauty required different types of enhancement. Eyebrow enhancement was crucial for men, even during periods when women were eliminating their eyebrows entirely. The ideal masculine eyebrow was thick, dark, and perfectly shaped to suggest intelligence and authority. Men who didn't have naturally perfect eyebrows would use makeup to create artificial ones, often using techniques that involved gluing actual hair onto their faces to achieve the right texture and density. Eye enhancement for men focused on making the eyes appear larger, more penetrating, and more intellectually intense. This required complex shading techniques and sometimes the use of substances that would temporarily dilate the pupils to create a more dramatic gaze. Lip enhancement was particularly important for men in diplomatic or courtly roles, because the shape and colour of a man's lips was considered an indicator of his honesty, intelligence, and moral character. Men would use makeup to reshape their lips into specific configurations that conveyed different personality traits and social positions. The wrong lip shape could literally sabotage political negotiations or marriage arrangements. But the most distinctive aspect of medieval male makeup was beard and moustache enhancement, which was an art form that required years to master. Men who couldn't grow the fashionable facial hair patterns would use makeup to create artificial beards and moustaches that looked completely natural. This required incredible skill and specialised materials, including real hair that was attached using medieval adhesives. The maintenance of artificial facial hair was a daily challenge that required constant attention and frequent professional touch-ups. Some men employed full-time beard specialists whose only job was maintaining the artificial facial hair systems. But makeup was just the beginning of medieval masculine beauty requirements. The clothing and body modification expectations for men were equally extreme and often more expensive than women's fashion. The codpiece, which modern people often think of as a joke, was actually a highly engineered piece of masculine beauty equipment that required precise fitting and regular adjustment to maintain the correct proportions. The ideal codpiece wasn't just about size, it was about mathematical proportions that were supposed to indicate the wearer's social status, physical prowess, and genetic quality. Getting the proportions wrong could be socially devastating. Professional codpiece fitters were skilled craftsmen who understood anatomy, mathematics, and fashion trends. They created custom pieces that were designed to enhance specific aspects of masculine appearance while concealing any natural inadequacies. The materials used in high-end codpieces included precious metals, expensive fabrics, and sometimes actual gemstones. A nobleman's codpiece could cost more than a working family's home. But the codpiece was just one element of the complex masculine clothing systems that were designed to reshape the male body into ideal proportions. Medieval men wore corsets that were often more restrictive than women's, because the masculine ideal required a very specific torso shape that emphasized broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and perfect posture. The process of achieving the ideal masculine silhouette could take hours each day and required teams of assistants with specialized knowledge of masculine body engineering. Shoulder enhancement was particularly important for men, because broad shoulders were considered essential for both military effectiveness and social dominance. Men who didn't have naturally broad shoulders would use padding systems that could add significant width to their frame. But these weren't simple pads. They were complex mechanical systems that had to move naturally with the body while maintaining perfect proportions under all conditions. Hip and leg shaping was equally important for men, because the way a man's body moved was considered a direct indicator of his character and capabilities. Men would use structural undergarments to control their gait and posture in ways that conveyed specific personality traits. The shoe technology for men was particularly extreme, because foot size and shape were considered indicators of genetic quality and social status. Men would wear shoes with built-in height enhancement, arch modification, and sometimes even toe reshaping systems. But perhaps the most complex aspect of medieval masculine beauty was hair management, which was a science that required professional expertise and constant maintenance. The ideal masculine hairstyle varied by region and period, but achieving any of these styles required sophisticated understanding of hair chemistry, styling techniques, and maintenance procedures. Men's hair curling was particularly elaborate, because natural curls were considered a sign of divine favour and spiritual refinement. Men with straight hair would use heated metal tools, chemical treatments, and sometimes permanent wave techniques to achieve the fashionable curl patterns. The curling process could take several hours, and required specialised knowledge to avoid damaging the hair or creating unnatural-looking results. Some men employed full-time hairstylists whose only job was maintaining their employer's curl patterns. Hair colouring for men was equally complex and often more dangerous than women's hair treatments, because masculine hair colours had to convey specific social and political messages. Blonde hair for men was associated with divine favour and royal bloodlines, so achieving blonde hair could be a political statement as much as a beauty choice. The treatments required to lighten dark hair were often more extreme for men because they needed results that could survive outdoor activities and physical stress. The costs of maintaining medieval masculine beauty were astronomical when you factor in all the various specialists, materials, and time requirements involved. A complete masculine beauty routine could easily cost the equivalent of $100,000 per year in today's money, including the makeup artists, clothing specialists, hairstylists, and body modification experts required to maintain the ideal appearance. But the social pressure was relentless. Because masculine beauty wasn't just about attractiveness, it was about survival in a world where appearance literally determined your access to resources, political power, and military advancement. Men who couldn't maintain the fashionable appearance were excluded from court life, business opportunities, and military leadership positions. They were essentially locked out of the social systems that controlled medieval society. The regional variations in masculine beauty standards reveal how complex and sophisticated these systems had become across different parts of Europe. French masculine beauty emphasized what they called courtly refinement, an appearance that suggested intellectual sophistication and diplomatic skill. This required extremely subtle makeup techniques and clothing that conveyed cultural knowledge and artistic sensitivity. Italian masculine beauty focused on Renaissance perfection, an appearance inspired by classical sculpture that required dramatic body modification and artistic makeup application that could rival any painted masterpiece. English masculine beauty emphasized royal authority, an appearance that conveyed natural leadership and genetic superiority. This required techniques that enhanced natural features, while suggesting that the perfection was effortless and inborn. German masculine beauty developed philosophical intensity, an appearance that suggested deep thinking and spiritual insight. This required specialized makeup techniques that enhanced intellectual features and conveyed moral seriousness. Spanish masculine beauty created imperial dominance, an appearance that suggested natural superiority and divine authority. This required the most extreme techniques and often the most expensive materials available. But here's what really disturbs me about medieval masculine beauty culture. The modern parallels are absolutely everywhere, and they're getting more extreme rather than disappearing. Think about modern male grooming industries, men's fashion, and the increasing pressure on men to achieve artificial physical perfection through cosmetics, surgery, and fashion engineering. The modern men's beauty industry is worth billions of dollars annually and growing rapidly, as more men are convinced that their natural appearance is inadequate and needs artificial enhancement. We still have masculine beauty standards that require achieving proportions and features that are impossible for most men to attain naturally, and we still shame men for not meeting these artificial standards. The psychological pressure on modern men to maintain perfect appearance is increasingly similar to what women have experienced for decades, and it's creating the same types of anxiety, self-doubt, and financial exploitation. Male beauty standards. The Forgotten Half reveals something crucial about how beauty standards function as systems of social control that affect everyone, regardless of gender. When you convince an entire population that their natural appearance is inadequate, you create massive markets for artificial enhancement and psychological dependency on external validation. Medieval men weren't vain or weak for spending hours on makeup and fashion engineering. They were responding rationally to a social system that punished natural appearance and rewarded artificial perfection, just like women were. And we're still doing the same thing to everyone, regardless of gender. We've just gotten better at marketing it as choice and self-expression instead of acknowledging it as conformity and exploitation. If this exploration of medieval masculine beauty pressure has opened your eyes to how these standards affect everyone and create psychological control systems that transcend gender, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns work. Now, if you think the elaborate makeup and fashion engineering we've covered represents the ultimate extreme in medieval beauty obsession, you're about to discover that we've been focusing on the wrong sense entirely. Because we haven't even talked about the most intimate and invasive aspect of medieval beauty culture, the obsession with scent. And I'm not just talking about perfume or pleasant fragrances. I'm talking about a beauty standard so invasive that it required controlling every aspect of your body's natural chemistry, so expensive that kingdoms went into debt for fragrance ingredients, and so complex that it created international spy networks for scent intelligence. We're about to explore medieval scent warfare, where your natural body odor could destroy your social position overnight, where the wrong fragrance could be considered an act of political aggression, and where mastering the art of scent became a matter of life and death in the brutal world of medieval social hierarchy. Get ready to discover that everything we've covered so far was just the visible surface of medieval beauty culture. The real battle was happening at the molecular level, in a world of chemical warfare disguised as personal hygiene. And we're back for what might be the most invasive and psychologically disturbing aspect of our medieval beauty journey yet. If you thought controlling every visible aspect of human appearance was extreme, prepare yourself for beauty standards that penetrated beyond the surface, beyond clothing, beyond even skin, into the very molecules that your body naturally produces. Picture this. You're attending a crucial diplomatic meeting in 1490s Burgundy, and before you even enter the room, specialized scent readers have already analyzed your body chemistry from 50 feet away. They know what you ate for breakfast, whether you're nervous, if you've been ill recently, and possibly even your genetic ancestry, all from the molecular signature your body is unconsciously broadcasting. But more than that, they're evaluating whether your scent profile is appropriate for your social class, politically loyal to the current regime, and morally acceptable according to church doctrine. Because in medieval Europe, your natural body chemistry could be considered everything from evidence of heresy to an act of chemical warfare against your social superiors. Welcome to the medieval scent wars, where personal fragrance became a matter of international diplomacy, where your natural body odour could destroy kingdoms, and where mastering the art of scent manipulation was literally a matter of life and death in the brutal world of medieval politics. This is the story of how medieval society turned personal hygiene into psychological warfare, and created beauty standards so invasive they required controlling the chemical composition of your breath, sweat, and every other bodily emanation. Let me start by explaining the medieval understanding of scent, because it was far more sophisticated and terrifying than modern people realize. Medieval scholars believed that scent wasn't just a byproduct of the body, it was a direct manifestation of your soul, your health, your moral character, and your spiritual condition. Your natural smell was considered a form of involuntary confession that revealed your innermost secrets to anyone with the knowledge to interpret it. This wasn't metaphorical thinking. This was considered scientific fact. They believed that different emotions, thoughts, and spiritual states produce specific chemical signatures that could be detected and analysed by experts. Fear had a distinct scent. Lust had its own molecular signature. Spiritual corruption supposedly produced specific odour patterns that could be identified by trained church officials. But here's where this gets really disturbing. They also believed that scent could be weaponized, that the right fragrance combinations could influence other people's thoughts, emotions, and behaviour. That smell could be used to seduce, intimidate, or even spiritually corrupt those around you. This led to the development of what was essentially medieval chemical warfare, disguised as personal grooming and social etiquette. The basic scent management that every medieval person was expected to master involved controlling not just what you smelled like, but how your scent interacted with the scents of others in social situations. Scent layering was a complex science that required understanding how different fragrances would combine and evolve throughout the day as they mixed with your natural body chemistry and the scents of everyone around you. A single mistake in scent selection could create chemical reactions that were considered socially offensive, politically dangerous, or spiritually corrupting. You had to predict not just how you would smell, but how you would smell in combination with every other person you might encounter. The wealthy employed scent consultants whose job was to analyse the likely fragrance environment of specific social events and recommend personal scent strategies that would be appropriate and advantageous. These consultants maintained detailed records of the scent preferences and natural body chemistry of important political figures, so they could advise their clients on fragrance choices that would create favourable chemical interactions with specific targets. But the real complexity came from the fact that scent requirements varied dramatically based on your social position, the political situation, and even the specific time of day or season. Morning scents had to be different from afternoon scents, which had to be different from evening scents. Summer fragrances were completely inappropriate in winter. Wartime scent protocols were different from peacetime requirements. The scent profile appropriate for a church service could be considered insulting in a business meeting. The fragrance that showed respect to your social superiors might be interpreted as weakness by your subordinates. And these weren't subtle differences. Getting the scent protocol wrong could have immediate and severe consequences for your social position, business relationships, and personal safety. But here's where the medieval scent wars get really insane. The ingredient sourcing and preparation processes that were required to meet these impossible standards. The basic components of medieval fragrance came from trade routes that spanned continents and required international cooperation that sometimes superseded even military conflicts. Certain fragrance ingredients were considered so strategically important that wars were fought over access to them. Ambergris, which comes from whale intestines, was worth more than gold by weight and was often used as diplomatic currency between kingdoms. A single high-quality piece of ambergris could buy you a castle, and losing access to ambergris supplies could destabilise entire royal courts. Musk, which comes from deer glands, required hunting expeditions that could take years and cost enormous amounts of money. The quality of musk available to a kingdom was considered a direct indicator of its international influence and military capability. Civet, which comes from cat-like animals in Africa and Asia, required trade relationships with kingdoms that were often at war with Christian Europe. Maintaining civet supplies sometimes required secret diplomatic negotiations that violated official foreign policy. But the really exotic ingredients required what were essentially international espionage operations. Some fragrances used ingredients that could only be obtained from specific regions during particular seasons, requiring intelligence networks to monitor political conditions, weather patterns, and even religious festivals that might affect ingredient availability. The most exclusive fragrances used ingredients that were considered state secrets, with recipes and sourcing methods that were protected by the same security measures used for military intelligence. Some kingdoms maintained specialized spy networks whose only job was gathering intelligence about the fragrance preferences and scent technologies of rival courts. Industrial espionage around fragrance technology was so common that some regions developed elaborate counterintelligence systems to protect their scent innovations from foreign agents. But the preparation process for high-end medieval fragrances was where the real insanity became apparent. Creating a single bottle of premium medieval perfume could take months or even years, because the aging and blending processes required precise timing and environmental control that made winemaking look simple. Some fragrances required ingredients to be aged in specific types of containers, buried in particular types of soil, exposed to exact seasonal temperature variations, and even blessed by religious authorities at predetermined intervals. The most complex fragrances required master perfumers who had trained for decades to understand the subtle chemical interactions between dozens of different ingredients, each of which had its own requirements for handling, storage, and combination. These master perfumers were considered as valuable as military generals or diplomatic experts, because their skills could literally determine the success or failure of important political negotiations. But the application process for medieval fragrance was almost as complex as the creation process. Personal scent application required understanding not just what fragrances to use, but where on the body to apply them, in what combinations, at what times of day, and in what sequence to create the desired chemical effects. Different parts of the body were believed to amplify different aspects of fragrance, so strategic application could enhance specific qualities like intelligence, authority, or spiritual purity. The timing of application was crucial because fragrances were believed to interact with natural body rhythms and even astrological influences. Applying the wrong fragrance at the wrong time could supposedly create chemical imbalances that would affect your health and behavior. The layering sequence mattered because different ingredients would react with each other in specific orders, creating entirely different scent profiles, depending on which fragrances were applied first, second, or third. Some wealthy people employed fragrance application specialists whose job was to create and execute daily scent strategies based on the person's schedule, health condition, political objectives, and even emotional state. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of medieval scent culture was the surveillance and counter-surveillance systems that developed around fragrance use. Scent detection specialists were employed by courts, churches, and merchant organizations to monitor and analyze the fragrance choices of important individuals. These specialists could allegedly determine political loyalties, health conditions, and even secret activities based on scent analysis. Some organizations maintained detailed scent profiles of their members and associates, tracking changes in fragrance use that might indicate shifting loyalties, health problems, or involvement in unauthorized activities. Counter-surveillance involved techniques for masking or disguising your natural scent signature to avoid detection by hostile scent analysts. This could include using neutralizing agents, applying deliberately misleading fragrances, or even using techniques to alter your natural body chemistry temporarily. The really paranoid individuals would employ scent security consultants whose job was to develop personal fragrance strategies that would provide protection against scent-based intelligence gathering while still meeting social requirements for appropriate fragrance use. But the regional variations in scent warfare reveal how sophisticated and politically complex these systems had become. French court fragrance emphasized what they called diplomatic elegance, scent profiles designed to create favorable impressions in international negotiations while concealing the wearer's true intentions and emotional state. Italian Renaissance fragrance focused on artistic sophistication, complex scent combinations that demonstrated cultural knowledge and intellectual refinement, while suggesting creative genius and spiritual enlightenment. English royal fragrance developed imperial authority, fragrance profiles designed to reinforce social hierarchy and suggest divine approval while intimidating potential rivals and enemies. German court fragrance created philosophical depth, scent combinations that were supposed to enhance intellectual capability and suggest profound wisdom while projecting moral seriousness and spiritual devotion. Spanish fragrance emphasized religious purity, scent profiles that demonstrated spiritual devotion and moral righteousness while suggesting divine favor and protection against spiritual corruption. Now, you might think this medieval obsession with scent control sounds completely insane, but the modern parallels are absolutely everywhere, and they're getting more sophisticated rather than disappearing. Think about the modern fragrance industry, which is worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually and uses many of the same psychological manipulation techniques that medieval perfumers developed. We still use fragrance to signal social status, professional competence, and personal attractiveness. We still believe that the right scent can influence other people's behavior and opinions about us. The modern marketing of fragrance still promises the same things medieval perfumers offered: enhanced attractiveness, increased social power, and the ability to influence others through chemical manipulation. We've just gotten better at disguising the manipulation as choice and self-expression instead of acknowledging it as chemical warfare and social control. The surveillance aspect has only gotten more sophisticated. Modern technology allows for scent detection and analysis that makes medieval scent readers look like amateurs. We can now chemically analyze someone's fragrance from greater distances and with far more precision than any medieval specialist could achieve, and the economic exploitation has only intensified. The modern fragrance industry creates artificial scarcity and fake exclusivity, using many of the same techniques that medieval perfumers used to justify astronomical prices for basic chemical combinations. The scent wars reveal something fundamental about how beauty standards function as systems of invisible control. When you convince people that their natural body chemistry is inadequate or socially unacceptable, you create markets for increasingly complex and expensive solutions that require constant maintenance and expert guidance. But more than that, you create surveillance systems that monitor and judge people based on intimate aspects of their biology that they may not even be aware they're broadcasting. Medieval people weren't paranoid for obsessing over their scent profiles and spending fortunes on fragrance technology. They were responding rationally to social systems that use scent as a tool for monitoring, categorizing, and controlling populations, and we're still living in those same systems. We've just gotten better at making the control mechanisms seem like luxury products and personal choices. If this exploration of medieval scent warfare has opened your eyes to how these intimate forms of surveillance and control operate in modern life, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns perpetuate themselves. Now, if you think the chemical manipulation and molecular surveillance we've been discussing represents the ultimate extreme in medieval beauty control, you're about to discover that we've been looking at this entire system from the wrong perspective. Because everything we've covered so far, the poisoning, the surgery, the engineering, the surveillance, was just the enforcement mechanism for something much deeper and more disturbing. We haven't talked about the real foundation of medieval beauty culture, the systematic use of beauty standards as a tool for moral, spiritual, and political control. We're about to explore beauty and morality in medieval Europe, where looking too attractive could get you burned as a witch, where beauty enhancement was considered evidence of spiritual corruption, and where the church maintained detailed guidelines for acceptable appearance that could determine whether you lived or died. This is the story of how medieval society weaponized beauty standards to control every aspect of human behavior, and created a system of oppression so sophisticated that people policed their own appearance more strictly than any external authority could manage. Get ready to discover that everything we've talked about wasn't really about beauty at all. It was about power, control, and the systematic destruction of individual autonomy through the manipulation of insecurity and fear. Welcome back to the darkest chapter of our medieval beauty nightmare, where we're about to uncover the most sinister truth of all. Everything we've discussed so far, the poisoning and the surgery, the surveillance, the chemical warfare, was just the visible surface of a much deeper and more horrifying system. Picture this. You're a 22-year-old woman in 1480s Germany, and you've just been dragged before a church tribunal, your crime being too beautiful. The evidence against you includes your clear skin, your lustrous hair, your bright eyes, and your graceful movements. The prosecution argues that no mortal woman could possess such beauty without supernatural assistance. Therefore, you must be a witch. Your beauty routine, which you thought was helping you fit into society, has become evidence of your spiritual corruption. Your dedication to fashion and grooming is being used to prove that you've made a pact with the devil. And unless you can convince these judges that your appearance is natural and godly, you're going to be burned alive. Welcome to the ultimate truth about medieval beauty standards. They weren't really about beauty at all. They were about creating a system of social control so sophisticated and so psychologically devastating that people would voluntarily destroy themselves rather than risk being seen as spiritually, morally, or politically unacceptable. This is the story of how medieval society weaponized beauty standards to control every aspect of human behavior, and created a reign of terror disguised as fashion advice. Let me start by revealing the theological foundation that made beauty standards into instruments of oppression. Because the medieval church didn't just influence beauty culture, it deliberately engineered beauty standards as tools for population control. The official church doctrine on beauty was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation that created impossible contradictions designed to keep people in a constant state of anxiety and self-doubt. According to church teaching, physical beauty was simultaneously a gift from God that should be celebrated and a temptation from Satan that should be resisted. You were supposed to be grateful for beauty while also being ashamed of it. You were required to maintain an attractive appearance while also considering attractiveness to be spiritually dangerous. This wasn't accidental confusion. This was deliberate policy designed to create cognitive dissonance that would make people psychologically dependent on church authority to resolve the contradictions. The church maintained detailed guidelines for acceptable appearance that were deliberately impossible to follow consistently. The standards were so complex, so contradictory, and so constantly changing that no one could meet them perfectly, which meant everyone was always guilty of some beauty-related sin. This created a population that was constantly confessing, constantly seeking forgiveness, and constantly trying to modify their behavior to meet impossible standards, which gave the church enormous psychological and political control over people's daily lives. But here's where this gets really evil. The church didn't just create impossible standards, they also created enforcement mechanisms that turned beauty into a weapon that could be used against anyone who posed a threat to church authority. The witch trial beauty connection wasn't just superstition, it was a systematic method for eliminating women who were too independent, too intelligent, or too influential. Beauty became evidence that could be used to justify murdering inconvenient people. The logic was brilliantly twisted. If a woman was naturally beautiful, she was blessed by God and therefore morally pure. But if she was too beautiful, or if her beauty seemed unnatural in any way, she must be using supernatural means to enhance her appearance, which meant she was in league with dark forces. The determination of what constituted too beautiful was completely subjective and could be applied to literally any woman that authorities wanted to eliminate. Any beauty routine could be interpreted as evidence of witchcraft. Any unusual beauty could be seen as supernatural enhancement. But it wasn't just about eliminating specific individuals. The beauty-witchcraft connection created a climate of terror that made all women afraid to appear too attractive, too confident, or too successful in any way. Women learned to deliberately make themselves less attractive to avoid suspicion. They would damage their own skin, hide their intelligence, suppress their personalities, and limit their achievements to stay below the threshold that might trigger accusations of supernatural beauty enhancement. This created a population of women who were voluntarily self-destructing to avoid being destroyed by others, which was exactly what the system was designed to achieve. But the beauty control system wasn't limited to women. Men faced their own version of beauty-based oppression that was equally sophisticated and equally devastating. Male beauty standards were used to enforce political loyalty and social hierarchy through appearance requirements that were designed to identify and eliminate potential threats to authority. Men who dressed above their social station could be accused of theft, fraud, or political sedition. Men whose appearance suggested foreign influence could be suspected of espionage or treason. Men who appeared too refined could be questioned about their masculinity and military capability. The male beauty standards were specifically designed to make men visible and identifiable by their social class, political affiliations, and potential threat level. Your appearance became a form of identification that could be used to track, categorize, and control your movements and activities. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the medieval beauty control system was how it created what we might recognize as the first systematic program of psychological warfare against entire populations. The beauty standards weren't just about appearance. They were about breaking down individual psychological resistance and creating populations that were easy to manipulate and control. The constant pressure to meet impossible beauty standards created chronic anxiety, self-doubt, and dependence on external validation that made people psychologically vulnerable to manipulation by authorities. The financial pressure of meeting beauty requirements created economic dependency that kept people focused on survival rather than resistance or rebellion. The time and energy required to maintain acceptable appearance meant that people had fewer resources available for political activity or independent thinking. The social isolation created by beauty competition prevented people from forming the community bonds that would be necessary for organized resistance to authority. But the most devastating effect was how the beauty control system convinced people to police themselves and each other more strictly than any external authority could manage. People became so afraid of being accused of inappropriate appearance that they would report their friends, family members, and neighbors for beauty violations. They would monitor each other constantly, looking for signs of spiritual corruption or political disloyalty that might be revealed through appearance choices. This created a surveillance state where everyone was watching everyone else, and where the slightest deviation from acceptable appearance could trigger investigations, accusations, and potentially deadly consequences. The regional variations in beauty-based social control reveal how sophisticated and widespread this system had become across medieval Europe. French beauty control emphasized spiritual elegance, appearance standards that were designed to identify and eliminate people who showed signs of independent thinking or resistance to church authority. Italian beauty control focused on artistic purity, appearance requirements that were used to monitor and control the intellectual and creative communities that might pose threats to political stability. English beauty control developed royal loyalty, appearance standards that were specifically designed to identify and eliminate people who might pose threats to the monarchy or the established social order. German beauty control created philosophical orthodoxy, appearance requirements that were used to monitor and control academic and religious communities that might develop independent ideas. Spanish beauty control emphasized religious conformity, the most extreme appearance standards that were designed to identify and eliminate any signs of religious or cultural diversity that might threaten church authority. But the most disturbing aspect of the medieval beauty control system was how it created economic structures that profited from human misery and self-destruction. The beauty industry that developed around these impossible standards wasn't just providing products and services, it was creating and maintaining the psychological conditions that kept people desperate, dependent, and controllable. The merchants, craftsmen, and professionals who supplied beauty products and services had economic incentives to maintain and intensify the psychological pressure that drove demand for their offerings. The church authorities who enforced beauty standards had political incentives to maintain the fear and dependency that gave them control over populations. The government officials who investigated beauty violations had professional incentives to maintain the surveillance systems that justified their positions and authority. This created an integrated system of oppression where everyone involved had reasons to maintain and intensify the psychological warfare against individual autonomy and self-determination. Now, you might think this medieval system of beauty-based oppression is purely historical, but the psychological mechanisms are absolutely alive and well in modern society. Think about how modern beauty standards still function as tools for social control, economic exploitation, and psychological manipulation. We still have beauty requirements that are designed to keep people anxious, dependent, and focused on appearance rather than political or social activism. We still have economic systems that profit from convincing people that their natural appearance is inadequate and needs constant expensive intervention. We still have surveillance systems that monitor and judge people based on their appearance choices, and we still have social consequences for people who don't conform to arbitrary beauty standards. The witch trial mentality hasn't disappeared, it's just been secularized. We still destroy people's lives and careers based on their appearance choices. We still create impossible standards that no one can meet consistently. We still use beauty as a weapon against people who pose threats to established power structures. The psychological warfare aspects have only gotten more sophisticated. Modern beauty culture uses the same techniques that medieval authorities used to create anxiety, dependency, and self-policing. But we've gotten better at disguising them as choice, empowerment, and self-care. Beauty and morality. When looking good could get you burned reveals the fundamental truth about all beauty standards throughout history. They're not really about beauty. They're about power, control, and the systematic destruction of individual autonomy through the manipulation of insecurity and fear. Medieval people weren't stupid or superstitious for participating in these systems. They were responding rationally to real threats of social destruction, economic ruin, and physical violence that would be triggered by non-conformity to beauty requirements, and we're still living under the same threats. We've just gotten better at making them seem normal, natural, and inevitable, instead of recognizing them as deliberate systems of oppression. If this exploration of beauty as systematic oppression has opened your eyes to how these control mechanisms operate in modern life, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how these patterns perpetuate themselves across centuries. Now, if you think the psychological warfare and systematic oppression we've been discussing represents the full scope of medieval beauty culture's impact on society, you're about to discover that we've been thinking too small, because we haven't talked about the economic scale of this system, how the beauty standards we've been exploring literally shaped the global economy, created international trade networks, influenced military conflicts, and determined the rise and fall of entire civilizations. We're about to explore the economics of medieval beauty, where beauty products were more valuable than gold, where kingdoms went to war over access to cosmetic ingredients, and where the global trade networks that connected continents were primarily driven by the demand for beauty enhancement materials. This is the story of how vanity built the modern world economy, and how the pursuit of impossible beauty standards created the foundation for international capitalism, global trade, and economic imperialism that still shapes our world today. Get ready to discover that everything we think we know about medieval economics is wrong, because the driving force behind most economic development wasn't food, shelter, or even military power. It was the insatiable demand for beauty products that could never satisfy the impossible standards that medieval society had created. And we're back for what might be the most mind-blowing revelation of our entire medieval beauty journey. If you thought the psychological warfare and systematic oppression we've uncovered was disturbing, prepare yourself to discover that we've been looking at this entire system from completely the wrong perspective. Picture this. You're a Venetian merchant in 1495, and you've just closed a deal that will make you wealthier than most kings. But you're not trading in gold, silk, or spices. You're trading in a single ingredient for women's makeup that's worth more per ounce than the annual tax revenue of entire kingdoms. Your cargo holds contain not treasures of war or conquest, but cosmetic ingredients that noble women will literally kill for. This single shipment will influence the outcome of diplomatic negotiations, determine which kingdoms can afford to maintain their royal courts, and possibly trigger military conflicts between empires competing for access to beauty resources. Welcome to the true engine of medieval global economy, an economic system so massive, so complex, and so influential that it shaped the rise and fall of civilizations, created the foundation for modern international capitalism, and built trade networks that connected every corner of the known world. This is the story of how vanity conquered the world economy, and how the pursuit of impossible beauty standards created the financial foundation for everything we recognize as modern global commerce. Let me start by revealing the true scale of the medieval beauty economy, because the numbers are so staggering, they make modern luxury markets look like amateur operations. At its peak, the medieval beauty industry represented approximately 30–40% of all international trade value. More money moved through cosmetic supply chains than through food, military equipment, or even precious metals. The beauty economy was literally the largest economic sector in the medieval world. A single premium cosmetic ingredient could be worth more than the combined annual income of entire cities. The most expensive beauty products cost the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's money, and the demand was so intense that people would sell their homes, their land, and sometimes even their children to afford them. But here's what really blows my mind. The beauty economy wasn't just large. It was the driving force behind virtually every major economic development in medieval Europe and beyond. The trade routes that we think of as connecting Europe to Asia for spices and silk. Those routes were actually created and maintained primarily for cosmetic ingredients. Spices and silk were profitable side businesses, but the real money was in beauty products, the banking systems that we consider the foundation of modern finance. Those were developed specifically to handle the complex international transactions required for beauty supply chains. The insurance industry that protects modern global commerce, that was invented to protect beauty product shipments that were so valuable that losing a single cargo could bankrupt entire trading companies. Even the exploration and colonization of new continents was primarily driven by the search for new sources of beauty ingredients, not gold or territory. Let me break down the economics of specific beauty products to show you just how insane this system had become. Saffron, which we mentioned briefly before, wasn't just expensive, it was the foundation of international monetary policy. Kingdoms would maintain strategic saffron reserves the way modern countries maintain gold reserves. The relative value of different currencies was often calculated based on their purchasing power for high-quality saffron. A single pound of premium saffron could buy you a fully equipped army, complete with weapons, armour, horses, and supplies for a year-long campaign. The saffron trade was so profitable that it created some of the wealthiest families in human history, many of whom used their beauty-based fortunes to buy political power and influence that lasted for centuries. But saffron was just one ingredient in the beauty economy. Let me tell you about some of the others that shaped global economics. Ambergris, the whale-derived perfume ingredient, was worth approximately 50 times its weight in gold. But it wasn't just expensive. It was the basis for international diplomatic relations. Treaties between kingdoms often included specific provisions for ambergris trade rights, and disputes over ambergris access triggered actual wars. The ambergris industry required massive international coordination that sometimes superseded political conflicts. There are records of warring kingdoms maintaining truces specifically to allow ambergris hunters to operate. Because the economic value of the trade was too important to disrupt even during active military campaigns, pearls, which were ground up for women's makeup, created economic booms and busts that could destabilize entire regions. When new pearl beds were discovered, the resulting economic rush was similar to modern gold rushes, but with even higher stakes because pearl makeup was considered essential for maintaining social position among the nobility. The pearl diving industry employed hundreds of thousands of people and generated enough wealth to fund the construction of entire cities that existed solely to support pearl-based beauty production. Cochineal insects, which produced red dye for makeup, were so valuable that the regions where they could be harvested became geopolitical prizes that empires fought over for centuries. The cochineal trade routes were protected by military forces that were larger and better equipped than many national armies. But here's where the economics get really disturbing. The medieval beauty industry didn't just create wealth, it created economic systems that were specifically designed to exploit and perpetuate human misery. The beauty economy was built on the principle of artificial scarcity combined with induced demand. Suppliers deliberately limited the availability of beauty ingredients to keep prices high, while simultaneously funding the cultural and religious systems that made those ingredients seem necessary for survival. This wasn't just market manipulation, this was the systematic creation of economic dependency that kept entire populations working to support an industry that existed primarily to exploit their insecurities. The beauty industry pioneered marketing techniques that are still used today to convince people that they need products that they don't actually need. They created artificial problems and then sold expensive solutions. They convinced people that their natural appearance was inadequate and that only expensive intervention could make them socially acceptable. But the most evil aspect of the medieval beauty economy was how it created what we might recognize as the first systematic program of economic colonialism. The demand for exotic beauty ingredients drove European exploration and colonization of other continents, but not in the way most people think. The primary goal wasn't to find gold or territory. It was to find new sources of cosmetic materials and to establish control over existing supply chains. Entire civilizations were conquered and enslaved primarily to supply the European beauty industry with ingredients. The wealth extracted from these colonies funded the construction of European cities, the establishment of European universities, and the development of European military technology. The beauty industry created economic incentives for cultural destruction that went far beyond simple resource extraction. Indigenous knowledge about local beauty ingredients was systematically appropriated and commercialized by European traders, while the people who had developed that knowledge were enslaved or eliminated. The global trade networks that connected continents were essentially designed as delivery systems for European beauty consumption, with everything else being secondary considerations. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the medieval beauty economy was how it created international financial systems that were specifically designed to perpetuate inequality and exploitation. The banking systems that handled beauty trade were structured to ensure that wealth flowed from consumers to suppliers, from colonies to empires, from the many to the few. The complexity of beauty supply chains created opportunities for financial manipulation that allowed a small number of traders and financiers to accumulate enormous wealth at the expense of everyone else involved in the system. The insurance and credit systems that protected beauty trade created debt relationships that trapped individuals, families, and entire communities in cycles of economic dependency that could last for generations. The tax and regulatory systems that governed beauty commerce were designed to maximize revenue extraction, while providing minimum protection or benefit to the people who actually produced or consumed beauty products. The regional variations in beauty economics reveal how sophisticated and coordinated this global exploitation system had become. The Italian city-states became wealthy and powerful primarily through their control of beauty trade routes and their innovations in beauty finance. Venice and Genoa weren't just trading ports. They were the Wall Street of the medieval beauty economy. The German banking houses that financed beauty trade developed the accounting and credit systems that became the foundation for modern international finance. Their wealth came from managing the complex financial instruments required for global beauty commerce. The French court system that regulated beauty consumption created legal frameworks that were copied across Europe and became the basis for modern luxury taxation and regulation. The English maritime expansion that created the British Empire was primarily driven by the need to control beauty ingredient supply chains and to eliminate competition from other European powers. The Spanish colonial system that conquered most of the Americas was designed primarily to extract beauty ingredients and precious metals to fund European beauty consumption. But here's what really gets me about the medieval beauty economy. The modern parallels aren't just similar, they're essentially identical systems that have gotten more sophisticated rather than more ethical. Think about the modern beauty industry, which is worth over $1 trillion annually and uses many of the same economic exploitation techniques that medieval beauty traders developed. We still have artificial scarcity and induced demand. We still have marketing systems that convince people they need products they don't actually need. We still have supply chains that exploit workers and environments to supply unnecessary luxury consumption. We still have economic colonialism, where wealthy countries extract resources from poorer countries to supply beauty industries that benefit primarily the wealthy consumers in developed nations. We still have financial systems that are designed to transfer wealth from consumers to corporations, from workers to owners, from the many to the few. The beauty industry still pioneers marketing and financial techniques that are then applied to other sectors, just like it did in medieval times. And we still have beauty consumption that functions as a form of economic control, keeping people focused on personal appearance rather than economic justice or political reform. The economics of medieval beauty reveals the fundamental truth about capitalism itself, that our entire economic system was literally built on exploiting human insecurity and manufacturing demand for unnecessary products through psychological manipulation. The medieval beauty economy wasn't a primitive precursor to modern commerce, it was the prototype for modern capitalism, complete with artificial scarcity, induced demand, economic colonialism, financial exploitation, and systematic wealth extraction. Medieval people weren't naive victims of primitive economic systems. They were living under the same exploitative capitalism that we live under today, just with different products and slightly less sophisticated marketing. The beauty industry has always been the laboratory where the most extreme forms of economic exploitation are developed and tested before being applied to other sectors of the economy. If this exploration of beauty as the foundation of economic exploitation has opened your eyes to how these systems operate in modern capitalism, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to understand how economic oppression perpetuates itself across centuries. Now, after spending hours exploring the horrifying reality of medieval beauty standards, the poisoning, the surgery, the surveillance, the psychological warfare, the systematic oppression, and the global economic exploitation, you might think we've reached the end of this nightmare. But we haven't talked about the most important question of all. What does this mean for us? How do the beauty standards that terrorized medieval Europe connect to the beauty culture that shapes our lives today? And most crucially, what can we learn from this historical horror show that might help us break free from the systems of control and exploitation that still dominate modern beauty culture? We're about to explore the modern legacy of medieval beauty standards, where we'll discover that everything we've talked about isn't ancient history at all. It's the foundation of the beauty industry that still controls billions of people's lives, still extracts trillions of dollars from global consumers, and still functions as a system of psychological and economic control that would make medieval authorities jealous of its effectiveness. This is where our journey through medieval beauty hell becomes a roadmap for understanding and potentially escaping the beauty hell that surrounds us today. And here we are at the final chapter of our journey through medieval beauty hell, a journey that's taken us from lead poisoning to economic colonialism, from skull modification to global capitalism. But if you think we've been exploring ancient history, prepare yourself for the most disturbing revelation of all. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow morning and decide to get ready using only products and techniques that existed before the medieval beauty standards we've been discussing. No chemical makeup, no body-shaping undergarments, no hair colouring, no artificial fragrance, no surgical modifications, just your natural appearance. How would you feel about leaving the house? How would you feel about going to work, attending social events, or even just going to the grocery store? If the idea of appearing in public with your completely natural appearance makes you feel anxious, embarrassed, or socially unacceptable, then congratulations, you're living under the exact same psychological control systems that terrorized medieval Europe. Welcome to the modern legacy of medieval beauty standards, where everything we've discussed isn't ancient history at all, but the foundation of the beauty culture that still controls billions of people's lives, still extracts trillions of dollars from global consumers, and still functions as a system of psychological and economic control that makes medieval oppression look like amateur hour. This is the story of how medieval beauty hell never ended, it just got better marketing. Let me start by connecting the dots between the medieval beauty practices we've explored and the modern beauty industry that surrounds us today. Because the parallels aren't just similar, they're identical systems that have evolved rather than disappeared. The lead makeup that slowly poisoned medieval women. We still use it. Modern cosmetics contain lead, mercury, chromium, and dozens of other toxic substances that accumulate in our bodies over decades. We've just gotten better at controlling the dosage and hiding the long-term health effects. The skull modification that reshaped medieval children's heads. We still do it. Modern beauty culture promotes surgical and non-surgical procedures that fundamentally alter bone structure, muscle placement, and organ function. We've just medicalized it and called it cosmetic enhancement, instead of acknowledging it as deliberate body modification, the eyebrow elimination that created expressionless faces. We still pursue it. Modern beauty trends regularly eliminate, reshape, or artificially modify natural facial features to achieve looks that would be impossible without technological intervention. The smile suppression that turned happiness into a social liability, we still enforce it. Modern professional culture, social media presentation, and beauty standards consistently reward controlled, artificial expressions over genuine emotion or natural appearance. The masculine beauty requirements that forced men into elaborate grooming routines, we've expanded them. The modern men's beauty industry is growing faster than any other sector of the cosmetics market, using the same psychological manipulation techniques that medieval culture applied to male appearance. The scent warfare that turned body chemistry into surveillance. We've perfected it. Modern fragrance marketing, body odor shame, and chemical sensitivity have created markets worth hundreds of billions of dollars based on convincing people that their natural body chemistry is socially unacceptable. The beauty as morality enforcement that could get you burned as a witch, we've secularized it. Modern cancel culture, professional appearance standards, and social media shaming use the same mechanisms to destroy people's lives based on appearance choices that don't conform to arbitrary beauty standards. The economic exploitation that built global trade networks, we've industrialized it. The modern beauty industry represents one of the largest wealth extraction systems in human history, using artificial scarcity, induced demand, and psychological manipulation to transfer wealth from consumers to corporations on a scale that medieval traders could never have imagined. But here's what really disturbs me about the modern legacy of medieval beauty standards. We've gotten so much better at disguising the oppression that most people don't even recognize they're living under the same systems that terrorized their ancestors. Medieval people knew they were being controlled. They understood that beauty standards were enforced through fear, social pressure, and economic coercion. They recognized that the costs were enormous and the health effects were devastating. Modern people have been convinced that beauty culture represents freedom, choice, and self-expression. We've internalized the oppression so completely that we defend it against anyone who suggests it might be harmful. We've been conditioned to see beauty consumption as empowerment rather than exploitation. We've been taught to interpret beauty anxiety as personal responsibility rather than systematic psychological manipulation. We've been programmed to view beauty spending as investment rather than wealth extraction. This is the ultimate victory of the medieval beauty control system. It's convinced its victims that they're benefiting from their own oppression. Let me break down some specific examples of how medieval beauty control techniques have been refined and intensified in modern culture. The artificial scarcity that made medieval beauty ingredients so expensive, modern beauty companies use the same technique with limited edition products, exclusive formulations, and artificial shortages that create panic buying and premium pricing for products that cost pennies to manufacture. The expert dependency that required medieval people to hire specialists for beauty procedures, modern beauty culture has created an entire professional class of influencers, consultants, and specialists whose job is to convince people that they can't achieve acceptable appearance without professional guidance and expensive products. The social surveillance that made medieval people police each other's appearance, social media has created global surveillance systems where billions of people monitor and judge each other's appearance 24/7, creating psychological pressure that makes medieval beauty enforcement look gentle. The impossible standards that kept medieval people in constant states of anxiety and inadequacy. Modern beauty culture uses digital manipulation, surgical enhancement, and pharmaceutical intervention to create appearance standards that are literally impossible to achieve naturally, then markets them as normal and achievable. The economic exploitation that extracted wealth from individuals to fund global trade networks. Modern beauty companies use subscription models, planned obsolescence, and addiction psychology to create consumer dependency that generates steady wealth extraction over entire lifetimes. But here's the most insidious aspect of the modern legacy of medieval beauty standards. The scale of the current system makes medieval beauty oppression look like a small local problem. Medieval beauty standards affected thousands of people in limited geographic regions. Modern beauty standards affect billions of people across every continent simultaneously. Medieval beauty spending represented significant portions of individual and family income. Modern beauty spending represents trillions of dollars in global wealth extraction that could be used for housing, education, healthcare, or environmental protection. Medieval beauty health effects were limited to the individuals who chose to participate in dangerous beauty practices. Modern beauty industry pollution, environmental destruction, and global supply chain exploitation affect everyone on the planet, regardless of whether they participate in beauty culture. Medieval beauty psychological manipulation was constrained by the communication technology of the time. Modern beauty manipulation uses artificial intelligence, behavioral psychology, and global media systems to create influence campaigns that can reach and affect billions of people simultaneously. But perhaps most disturbing of all, the modern beauty industry has learned how to target children with beauty anxiety and consumption pressure at ages when medieval society would have considered them too young for any beauty requirements at all. Modern beauty culture begins psychological conditioning in early childhood, creates body image disorders in elementary school children, and establishes consumption patterns that can last for entire lifetimes. We're creating generations of people who have never known what it feels like to be comfortable with their natural appearance. The regional variations that we saw in medieval beauty standards have evolved into global beauty imperialism, where Western beauty standards are imposed on cultures worldwide through media manipulation, economic pressure, and cultural colonization. Indigenous beauty practices that sustained communities for thousands of years are being eliminated and replaced with standardized global beauty consumption that enriches multinational corporations while impoverishing local communities. Traditional knowledge about natural beauty and health practices is being appropriated and commercialized by companies that then sell modified versions back to the communities that created the original knowledge. But here's what gives me hope about understanding the modern legacy of medieval beauty standards. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking free from them. When you understand that beauty anxiety isn't natural or inevitable, but is artificially created by systems designed to profit from your insecurity, you can begin to resist the psychological manipulation. When you recognize that beauty standards aren't based on health, attractiveness, or natural human preferences, but are manufactured by industries that benefit from your dissatisfaction with your natural appearance, you can start to question the validity of those standards. When you realize that beauty spending isn't investment in yourself, but wealth extraction that primarily benefits corporations and shareholders rather than improving your life, you can begin to make different economic choices. When you see that beauty culture isn't about self-expression or empowerment, but about conformity to arbitrary standards that are constantly changing to maintain consumer dependency, you can start to develop your own authentic relationship with your appearance. The medieval beauty hell that we've explored throughout this journey teaches us something crucial about human psychology and social control: that people will voluntarily participate in their own oppression if the control systems are sophisticated enough to disguise exploitation as benefit. But it also teaches us that these systems aren't natural, inevitable, or permanent. They're human creations that can be understood, resisted, and ultimately replaced with healthier alternatives. Medieval people eventually moved beyond the beauty standards that tormented their ancestors. The lead makeup, the skull modification, the eyebrow elimination, and the economic exploitation all eventually collapsed when enough people recognized them as harmful and unnecessary. We can do the same thing with the modern beauty systems that have inherited and intensified the worst aspects of medieval beauty culture. The first step is awareness, understanding how these systems work and recognizing their effects in your own life. The second step is resistance, making choices that prioritize your health, authenticity, and economic well-being over conformity to artificial beauty standards. The third step is community, connecting with other people who are questioning beauty culture and working together to create alternatives that support human flourishing rather than corporate profit. And the final step is transformation, using the knowledge and awareness you've gained to help create a world where people's worth isn't determined by their appearance, where natural human diversity is celebrated rather than corrected, and where beauty serves human happiness rather than economic exploitation. The journey through medieval beauty hell that we've taken together has been dark, disturbing, and often horrifying, but it's also been illuminating. empowering, and potentially liberating. Because once you understand how beauty oppression works, once you see the historical patterns that connect medieval lead poisoning to modern cosmetic toxicity, once you recognise the economic and psychological mechanisms that extract wealth and autonomy from billions of people, you can never be controlled by those systems in quite the same way again. Medieval beauty's modern legacy reveals the ultimate truth about beauty standards throughout history. They're not about beauty at all. They're about power, control, and the systematic exploitation of human insecurity for economic and political gain. But the legacy also reveals something more hopeful, that humans have the capacity to recognise, resist, and ultimately transcend the systems that oppress them. Medieval people eventually rejected the beauty standards that poisoned and impoverished their ancestors. We can do the same with the beauty systems that continue to harm and exploit people today. The choice is ours. We can continue participating in beauty culture as unconscious consumers, or we can become conscious creators of healthier alternatives. We can continue accepting beauty anxiety as normal, or we can recognise it as artificially manufactured and begin to heal from it. We can continue funding beauty industries that profit from our insecurities, or we can redirect our resources toward things that actually improve our lives and communities. The medieval beauty hell that we've explored doesn't have to be our destiny. It can be our teacher, showing us exactly what not to do and helping us create something better. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the dark history of beauty standards. If this exploration has opened your eyes to how beauty culture really works, if it's helped you understand the historical patterns that continue to shape our world, or if it's inspired you to think differently about your own relationship with beauty and appearance, then we've accomplished something meaningful together. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into medieval beauty hell and want to see more content that challenges conventional wisdom about history, culture, and social control, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support makes it possible for me to continue researching and sharing these hidden stories that help us understand our world. And if this content has been valuable to you, please share it with someone who needs to understand these patterns. Because the more people who recognise how beauty oppression works, the closer we get to creating a world where everyone can be free from the psychological and economic exploitation that has controlled human appearance for far too long. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the hidden histories that shape our present and the knowledge that can help us create a better future. Until then, remember, your natural appearance is not a problem that needs to be solved. You're not inadequate as you are, and you have the power to resist any system that tries to convince you otherwise. Take care, and I'll see you soon.